Chapter 564. Changda's voice was erratic like a ghost, which made the atmosphere in the hall quite gloomy and horrible. Emperor Jing clenched a memorial in his hand and said, "So that thing was really done by them?" "That's probably it," Changda said. "But it's more than that. If we follow that clue, I'm afraid more people can be found." "Then keep digging." Emperor Jing's voice gradually became cold. "I won't let go of anyone who participated in that matter." After he finished speaking, the entire hall fell into a deathly silence. Until there was a creaking sound, the door of the hall was pushed open a little, and the sunlight outside shone in. A head poked in from outside, and the proud Lolita said with some doubt, "Why don't you open the door in broad daylight?" Her body flashed and appeared in the hall. She trotted over with a smile and said, "Father, I have something good for you to eat." "What good thing did you steal from the catering company again?" A smile appeared on Emperor Jing's face, and he held her in his arms. "Father, try it first." The proud Lolita took out a handkerchief from her arms and carefully opened it. She took out a small milky white pastry and put it in Emperor Jing's mouth. "It tastes good. Is it a new pastry made by the catering company?" Emperor Jing asked with a smile on his face. The proud Lolita curled her lips and said, "Those stupid royal chefs can't make such delicious things. This was made by master. Hey, give me 2 more pieces. I'll go to find my mother. She hasn't tasted it yet." Seeing her skipping out, the smile on Emperor Jing's face lasted for a long time. Changda picked up the memorials scattered on the ground and organized them. He said, "Your Majesty, do you want the Secret Intelligence Office to investigate the King of Shu?" "No need." Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "Li Xian can't do such a thing, but some people can't wait." Feeling the coldness in his words, Changda knew that some people would not have a good time in the court tomorrow. "Prime Minister Qin, what should we do now that things have come to this?" In Qin's mansion, many people were staring at Prime Minister Qin. "Fortune and misfortune, misfortune and fortune." Qin Xiang sighed and said, "You don't need to do anything, and you can't do anything." He shook his head and walked out with his hands clasped behind his back. His body was even more hunched than before. Was the decision he made more than 10 years ago right or wrong? At this moment, even he himself had deep doubts about it. He walked to the door and waved his hand at a person standing in the corridor, saying, "Tell Imperial Concubine Shui that I am powerless in this matter." "Did you find it?" In the King of Shu's residence, more than 10 officials were waiting anxiously. When they saw a servant coming in, someone immediately asked, "Not yet." The servant shook his head and said helplessly. Everyone's faces were filled with panic. Time was of the essence, and the consequences of every 15 minutes they wasted might be even more severe. Unable to find the King of Shu, someone had already entered the palace to report to Concubine Shui. No one knew what the outcome would be. If Her Highness still did not return, it would be too late when the palace doors closed today. Even they couldn't help but feel a chill when they thought about what would happen in the morning assembly. At this moment, a maidservant hurriedly ran in and said, "Her Highness is back." Hearing this, everyone got up and quickly walked out of the hall. The King of Shu was supported by 2 servants. His eyes were hazy and his body was swaying. When he saw everyone coming out to greet him, he was stunned for a moment. Then he asked doubtfully, "Why are all of you here?" Then, as if he had thought of something, a smile appeared on his face. He said, "I know you are also here to congratulate I." "Good, good. Give the order to hold a banquet in the king's residence tonight." "Your Highness." Everyone was already anxious. In such a critical situation, they were burning with anxiety in the king's residence, while the King of Shu was enjoying himself outside. Finally, someone couldn't help but shout angrily with a face full of anger. "Ah!" The King of Shu raised his head in confusion, not knowing why the other party was angry. The official's face was full of disappointment as he said, "Your Highness, if this continues, your position in the Eastern Palace will be in danger." "What?" The King of Shu was very sensitive to these 2 words. He instantly sobered up and asked anxiously, "What happened? Why is it like this?" He thought that the position was within his reach, but now someone told him that he might not be able to be the emperor. How could he not be anxious? Seeing that the king of Shu still hadn't realized what the crisis was, the hearts of everyone present turned cold on the spot. The king of Shu was very lucky, because the empress had no legitimate son and could no longer bear children. He, who was born by noble concubine Shui, was equivalent to the eldest son of the legitimate wife. He was the first in line to be the next emperor. His mother was noble concubine Shui, and he had the backing of the Shui family, as well as many noble families who shared the glory and disgrace of the Shui family. Because of these factors, many officials in the imperial court had long been on good terms with him. Even the current prime minister did not shy away from supporting him. He could even stay in the capital city without going to his fief. These were all things that the other princes combined did not have. However, he was also unlucky. From the moment he knew what an emperor was, he knew that he would be the emperor in the future. He could be the emperor without doing anything. As a result, he had never thought of making progress, and was content with enjoying life. As long as he was a playboy of the royal family, there would be people who would help him. The king of Shu was broad-minded and recruited talents. He was proficient in both literary and military strategies. He was the best candidate to become the crown prince. That was why he was today's idiot. It was a blessing and a curse. At this moment, everyone understood what Prime Minister Qin meant. The official said in a low voice, "We'll talk about this on the way. Now, you should immediately go to the palace and ask for forgiveness from His Majesty. There may still be a chance to turn things around. Otherwise, something big will happen." Even though there were still many things he couldn't figure out, there was one thing he knew better than anyone else. If he didn't do as the other party said, he might really lose the throne. At this moment, he had completely sobered up from the wine he drank last night. The complacency he had during the day was also swept away. He hurriedly said, "Prepare the horse, hurry, prepare the horse. I want to go to the palace." A moment later, a flustered and exasperated voice came from outside the palace gate. Why don't you let me in?" The leader of the imperial guards in charge of guarding the palace gate looked at the king of Shu and said, "Your Highness, the palace gate is closed now. If you want to enter or leave, you must have His Majesty's token. If you don't have it, please wait a moment, Your Highness. We will send someone to inform you immediately." The king of Shu glared angrily, his eyes bloodshot. "Open your dog eyes and take a good look. I am the king of Shu. How dare you stop me?" "I'm sorry, this is my duty." The leader took a step back. The imperial guards beside him had already surrounded him according to a certain formation. No matter who the other party was, they would not be polite to anyone who trespassed the palace gate. "Send someone to inform him immediately. Tell him that I have an urgent matter to discuss with my father." The king of Shu walked to the side of the palace gate and looked at the night sky. His expression was incomparably ferocious. He gritted his teeth and said word by word, "Who is it that is trying to harm me?" "Of course it's me." Li looked at Mississippi Lu and said firmly, "Who else can think of such a high-end name? I will call it White Rabbit. Don't even think about Rui Candy and Little Ring Candy." Chapter 565. This time, he would not compromise even if he was beaten to death. Big White Rabbit was Big White Rabbit. No matter where she went, she would be Big White Rabbit. Mississippi Lu did not bother to argue with him and asked, "Are you going to the palace tomorrow?" He could not miss such a big show. Li nodded and said, "Yes, I should go to the palace tomorrow morning." "Then help me return these secret books to Emingzu." Mississippi Lu walked over and put the books on the table beside her. "Okay," Li responded. When she was about to walk out, he suddenly asked, "Why did you think of letting someone learn the fox's voice? If someone found out, it would be self-defeating." According to his original plan, he would only let the fox hold a piece of yellow cloth in its mouth. Mississippi Lu's move was even more ruthless. She was a good seedling for rebellion. Mississippi Lu glanced at him and said, "Who said that talking must be done with the mouth?" After a moment, Li shook his head. He had actually forgotten about ventriloquism. For some people, they could speak without using their mouth. Not to mention those people in the martial arts world. There was no lack of such talents in the brothel. The servant girl was still disappointed at the side. The son-in-law would rather give the delicious food the name of a rabbit than the name of Xiaohuan. When she heard what he said just now, she immediately forgot about this matter and asked curiously, son-in-law, son-in-law, can foxes also speak? Li Yi turned his head and said with a smile, yes, have you not heard of the nine-tailed fox? What is the nine-tailed fox? The servant girl suddenly widened her eyes. Li Yi lowered his voice and said, according to the legend, in a place called Green Mountains, there is a fox with 9 tails. It only eats beautiful young girls like you. The servant girl's face turned pale. She immediately leaned to the side and grabbed his arm. She raised her head again and asked in a low voice, then what happened? After an hour, Li Yi gently pushed away the little servant girl who was curled up in his arms. He could not continue telling this story. If he continued, it would become torture. He did not know if it was because she had eaten well in the past year, but the little servant girl who used to have a flat figure had not only become more beautiful, but her figure had also changed greatly. Hugging her like this for a long time, he really could not hold himself back anymore. The servant girl was a little scared after the son-in-law told the story of the fox spirit. She planned to sleep with second miss at night. When she walked into her room with the quilt, in the palace, a woman in palace dress also walked into a palace. Her face was extremely gloomy. All the eunuchs and palace maids in the palace held their breath and did not dare to breathe. Presumably, since the imperial consort did not see His Majesty this time, they had to be even more careful. At this time, even the slightest mistake would lead to severe punishment. The eunuch showed a helpless expression and said, Your Highness, Prime Minister Qin said that he was powerless in this matter. Powerless? The eunuch showed a helpless expression and said, Your Highness, Prime Minister Qin said that he was powerless in this matter. Powerless? The voice of the woman in palace dress suddenly became shrill. What do you mean powerless? Why didn't he think about the reason why the Qin family could be like this today? This time my son is in trouble. Does he want to stand by and do nothing? Don't forget, if something happens to my son, they will not have a good ending. Hearing these words, the eunuchs and palace maids in the hall lowered their heads even more. Father, it's cold outside. Go back inside. In the Qin manor, Prime Minister Qin was sitting alone in the courtyard. Someone came from behind and put a piece of clothing on his shoulder. It's okay. My old bones can still hold on for a few more days. Prime Minister Qin waved his hand and said, How is his body? The middle-aged man knew who he was talking about. He shook his head and said, Old injuries have not healed, and new ones have come. The imperial doctor said that he needs to rest well. If there is another accident, I'm afraid that it will hurt his foundation. The middle-aged man paused and said, Father, if you ask for leave tomorrow, I'm afraid it will be difficult to explain to concubine Cui and the Cui family. Over the years, the Qin family had been able to maintain a stable position in the imperial court. Most of it was due to concubine Cui and the Cui family's efforts in the imperial court. Otherwise, the once illustrious Qin family would probably only have one prime minister. Once his father retired, the decline of the Qin family would become inevitable. It was not wise to offend concubine Cui, the Cui family, and the king of Shu who was likely to succeed the throne. It would also make the Qin family's many years of hard work go to waste. No matter how prominent a family is, after a few decades or 100 years, it will almost exhaust its luck. Someone has to fight for it. Otherwise it will not be able to be prominent for hundreds or even thousands of years. Prime Minister Qin did not answer. He looked at the night sky and said, I'm old. In the future, these things should be left to these young people. Looking at his father's lonely and desolate back, he slowly walked into the room. The middle-aged man seemed to realize something, and his body trembled slightly. Today's morning court was destined to be unusual. The white fox spoke, the stone tablet revealed words, and the sensitive song could even be sung by 5-year-old children in the capital. In the past 2 days, several matters had almost turned the capital upside down. The king of Shu had become a legend among the people. The body of a true dragon, the person chosen by the heavens, and the only candidate to inherit the throne. It was almost said that the emperor should give up the throne to him as soon as possible. In the current situation, such a move was extremely stupid. Almost all the censors in the imperial censorate submitted a joint petition. Dozens of ministers in the court impeached him at the same time. Prime Minister Qin asked for leave, and no one in the King of Shu's faction dared to speak out under such circumstances. One person impeached, then stepped down, and another person took over. The entire court was in order. The emperor's expression had been very calm, as if there was no difference from the usual morning court. He calmly issued some edicts. The Cui family, the Chun family, the Qin family. The change of positions of more than 10 officials in the court showed what kind of storm was brewing behind this calm. The efforts of the King of Shu's faction over the years had gone up in smoke in this calm, but no one raised any objections. Everyone knew the seriousness of this matter, but no one knew how long the emperor's calmness would last. Perhaps because of someone's words or action, the emperor would explode. At that time, it would be a real thunderbolt. After that, another decree stirred up another storm in everyone's hearts. As a grown-up prince, the King of Shu would go to the land of Shu today. After that, he could not return to the capital without an imperial edict. This was already an extremely serious punishment. With this imperial edict, the King of Shu's advantage over the other grown-up princes was almost negligible. Without the capital and the center of power of the Jing kingdom, what qualifications did he have to fight for power? His influence in the imperial court had been sharply reduced, and the King of Shu had been directly banished from the capital. How much effort would the King of Shu's faction have to expend to dispel the heavy dark clouds above his head and re-establish his advantage? Of course, there was another extremely serious matter that they did not think about in detail. At such a critical moment for the King of Shu, Prime Minister Qin, as the core figure of the King of Shu's faction, did not go to the court? Not to mention that in a short period of one night, he could not even go to the court. Even if he was really sick, there should be a memorial to the throne. Could it be that Prime Minister Qin had given up on the King of Shu? For a moment, everyone was even more flustered. Li did not have so many messy things to think about. He looked at the proud Lolita and then at Monarch Jean, who had swallowed a lot of saliva, and said, "Can't you give him a piece?" The proud Lolita held a box in her hand and said aggrievedly, "I don't have many pieces left." Although she said so, she had already opened the box, took out a piece of milk candy, and handed it to Monarch Jean. She said, "Since Sir has said so, I will give you one. I don't have any more." After saying that, she immediately turned to look at Li Yi and shook the box in her hand in front of him. She said, "Look, I don't have any more. I will go home with you later and fill this box up. Take it, take as much as you want." Li Yi waved his hand and looked in a certain direction. An official had already walked out of the hall. Li Xian walked over from afar and told him everything that had happened just now. He still had a look of disbelief on his face. "I did not expect that this matter would be so serious. The King of Shu has to leave the capital tomorrow, without any delay. After working hard for 20 years, everything is back to normal overnight." Li Yi also sighed and said, "What kind of sin did I commit?" Li Han yearned for Sir's house, which he had heard countless times. However, he could not go wherever he wanted like his royal sister. He whispered in her ear, "Royal sister, when you go to Sir's house, give me some. I will exchange a Mingzu for it." Chapter 566. The emperor was sick, but he expelled the most qualified prince from the capital. No matter how one looked at it, it was an absurd thing to do. Not to mention how much turmoil it would cause in the imperial court. It might even cause some panic among the people. However, the King of Shu's actions had indeed violated a great taboo. The officials were not surprised by the emperor's decision. No matter what, the throne still belonged to the emperor. Although it might belong to the King of Shu in the future, the emperor did not give it to the King of Shu, and the King of Shu could not take it. Using actions that were no less than a rebellion to build support for himself, ultimately leading to this result. This time he was not wronged at all. Leaving just like that, Li Yi sighed, his tone somewhat sorrowful. This was not the usual small squabble. The King of Shu was rebelling, Dragging him out to be beheaded was not an extravagant hope. No matter what, he had to be stripped of his title, demoted to a commoner, and exiled for 3,000 miles, never to return to the capital. The old emperor was still too benevolent. He lacked the boldness of an eternal emperor. This was not the first time he felt this way. Just as he was about to return home after watching the show, he saw a figure limping towards him from afar. Li Han was stunned for a moment, then immediately said, "Greetings, imperial brother." The king of Shu's expression was dull. He raised his head and looked over. Even when he saw Li Yi and Li Xian, his expression did not change much. After all, compared to what had just happened to him, some things were not worth mentioning. Seeing the king of Shu's head lowered, not even looking at him, Li Han scratched his head in confusion and waved. "Farewell, imperial brother." It would be difficult to see him again. Li Yi shook his head and turned to walk out of the palace. The arrogant Lolita shouted from behind, "Sir, wait for me. I'll go back and get a big box." After becoming a young lady, the old emperor seemed to have really relaxed his discipline towards the arrogant Lolita. Her treatment gradually became closer to that of the princess royal, and she did not even need to specially report when she left the palace. Outside a certain palace, while waiting for her to enter to change her clothes and get a big box, she inadvertently glanced sideways and saw an arched door. Two eunuchs dragged a person out and walked past her. That person must have been caned. His back was broken, and he seemed to be exhaling more than he was inhaling. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. A place like the imperial palace looked bright and majestic, but in fact, there were many dark and dirty things happening in the dark. Not only did the concubines fight openly and covertly, but sometimes even the princess would be involved. Yongning and the Tsundra Lolita were still young. When they grew up, they would more or less come into contact with some things. With their abilities, they would not be able to fight against those people. After 2 years, when the Princess Royal Highness moved out of the palace, the two of them, especially Yongning, would really make people worry. While he was thinking about these things, a dozen eunuchs and palace maids stood in the courtyard of a palace not far from here. Their heads were lowered, their bodies trembling, and they were as silent as cicadas in winter. Early this morning, the imperial consort had smashed all the precious vases in the hall. One of the servants who went in to clean up the mess had been whipped dozens of times on his back and fainted. Even the king of Shu had been slapped by the imperial consort and scolded for almost an hour. At this moment, no one dared to approach the door. "We haven't lost yet." In the empty hall, the woman in the palace dress smashed the last precious porcelain and took out a sealed envelope from her sleeve. She said, "Go out of the palace and personally deliver this letter to the master. In addition, let him ask what the Qin family wants." "Yes, your highness." A sharp voice came from the darkness. Someone walked out, responded, and soon disappeared from the hall. Although the imperial court was far away from ordinary people, some major events in the imperial court could not be hidden from the people of the capital. They did not know about the demotion or transfer of some officials, but the news that the king of Shu was about to leave the capital and go to his fief spread like a whirlwind throughout the capital not long after the morning court session ended. After all, the king of Shu was a hot topic in the capital recently. From being ridiculed by the public and being called Rat King to the series of omens, it all showed that he was the real son of heaven. His reputation rose, and he was expelled from the capital today. In just a few days, he had experienced many twists and turns. Even the vendors in the market would talk about it when they had nothing to do. Didn't they say that the throne is going to be passed on to the king of Shu? Why was he suddenly expelled? What succession? Who did you hear it from? Everyone said it. Even the fox said that the king of Shu should be the emperor. How can it be false? Nonsense. How can you believe that? Everyone knows that those things were done by the king of Shu himself. Whoever believes that is a fool. What? It was all done by the king of Shu himself? Of course. Otherwise, why would he be expelled from the capital? If you ask me, he is too impatient. In just half a day, the truth of the matter began to spread among the people. After praising the king of Shu for a few days, people realized that the Rat King was still the same Rat King. He had not changed at all. He had done so many things to deceive them. Now he had deceived the world and even the fox, but he had failed to deceive the current emperor. He had been banished far away. It was really a case of going for wool and coming home shorn. Regarding this matter, even the government did not interfere much. Instead, they were deliberately guiding the way. After all, it was not important whether this was done by the king of Shu or not. What was important was to eliminate the impact of this matter in the people as soon as possible. If it was used by people with ulterior motives, it would cause a huge mess. The Qi and Zhao kingdoms had left envoys in the capital. If they did not settle this matter as soon as possible, when they sent the news back, it would be greatly detrimental to the stability of the court. This time, the king of Shu and his faction had suffered heavy losses. Not only were their forces purged in the court, but they were also far away from the center of power. They had gone to the faraway Shu prefecture, and no one knew when they would return. Many people in the court had worked hard for more than 10 years, but their efforts were ruined in an instant. At this moment, a middle-aged man dressed in luxurious clothes stood at the entrance of the Qin residence. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "Prime Minister Qin is seriously ill and cannot receive guests?" The servant of the Qin family said helplessly, "Please bear with us." The middle-aged man had a thoughtful look on his face. Not long after, he turned and left. A person beside him asked worriedly, "Master, what should we do now?" "Go to the Qin residence." The middle-aged man took a deep breath and said softly, "In the Duke of Qin residence, the master of the family Qin Qing had just received an esteemed guest." The two of them dismissed all the servants and had a deep conversation in the room for a full 2 hours. The second master of the Qin family, Chen Chong, walked into a small courtyard with his hands behind his back. He bumped into a servant girl and asked, "How is Mrs. Health?" The servant girl hurriedly replied, "Second master, she felt much better after waking up today. 2 days ago, she obtained the Heart Sutra personally written by Master Tan Yin at the Cold Mountain Temple. She is currently reciting the sutra in the temple hall. Do you need me to go and inform her?" "All right, I'll go over myself. You can go and do what you need to do." Chen Chong waved his hand and continued walking into the courtyard. He slowly walked to the outside of the temple hall. He heard a low chanting coming from inside, but he did not disturb it. He only walked in after the voice disappeared. The white-haired, beautiful woman knelt on a prayer mat and asked softly, "Is there a guest in the residence today?" "There is an important guest who has come and is currently speaking with Big Brother." Chen Chong nodded and said, "You have just recovered from a cold, so you should be resting in your room." The woman sighed and said, "That child Lisan has passed away. I wanted to recite the sutra for him. When he came to the residence when he was young, I even carried him in my arms. Who would have thought that life would be so unpredictable?" Chen Chong paused for a moment, then nodded and said, "You have already recited the sutra. Come, let me help you back to your room." The woman lowered her head and suddenly said in a low voice, "Second brother, can you stop now?" "What?" Chen Chong asked in confusion. "Can you stop now?" The woman raised her head and looked at him. Her voice trembled as she said, "Don't make things difficult for that child. Lisan's surname is also Chen. How could you do it?" Chen Chong's body trembled. He clenched his fists so tightly that his nails dug into his palms. After a moment, he sighed and walked over. He helped her smooth out a strand of her hair and said, "All right, I'll listen to you. Second brother will listen to you." He looked at the silver-haired woman, who already had a few wrinkles at the corners of her eyes. His lips curled into a smile, but deep pain and hatred flashed through his eyes. The preparations were a little rushed. He sighed again and said in his heart. Chapter 567. The stonemason has been sent to Qing Prefecture. The beast tamer and the ventriloquist have also been sent to other places. They won't appear in the capital for 5 years. Li Yi was researching more types of candies in preparation for the upcoming opening of the candy shop. Mississippi Lu walked over and said calmly, although there were almost no traces left behind, it was better to erase all clues just in case. The 3 people would live a good life in Qing Prefecture. After 3 to 5 years, When the rumor died down, they would return to the capital and take over the position of a shop manager. The king of Shu will leave the capital today, Mississippi Lou suddenly said. Lee looked up at her and said, "Don't do anything rash. We can't do this for now." Although the king of Shu was a bastard, who could even force his father to abdicate, a bastard prince was still a prince. If something happened to him on the way out of the capital, it would be a serious matter. Mississippi Lou glanced at him and turned to leave. "The hero conference is about to start, right?" Lee asked again. "In 5 days." Mississippi Lou waved her hand and didn't look back. This was going to be interesting. It was different from what he saw on TV. It was a real hero conference with martial arts masters gathering. He was looking forward to it. "I'll send you 1,000 miles away. You're silent and black and white." Lee hummed a tune and continued to work with his head down. He still needed to think about how to choose the high-end and low-end candy shops and what the prices were. At dusk, the main street of the capital was filled with pedestrians. Today was the day that the king of Shu would leave the capital. A procession of hundreds of people passed through the street. It was a grand scene, accompanying officials, guards, and all kinds of resources. The procession left the city gate in a grandiose manner. Most of the people in the capital were just there to watch the show, but some people thought of something deeper. With the departure of the king of Shu, there would be no more adult princes in the capital. Those princes who had already gone to their respective fiefs and felt that there was no hope would be active again. They would try their best to fight for that glimmer of hope. But did His Majesty have any other intentions? Although many of the adult princes were useless, Prince Jean, who was 10 years old, was a clear stream among all the princes. Although he was young, his ability was outstanding. He did not disappoint the courtiers and the people. If His Majesty's body could hold on for a few more years, maybe the emperor's heart was unpredictable. Besides, the situation in the court was complicated. This was only a guess. After all, Prince Jean was still young, and no one in the court thought that he would inherit the throne. He was alone, and was unlikely to be a match for the king of Shu. At this time, outside the capital, in a luxurious carriage, an old man sitting in the front took out an item from his bosom, lifted the curtain, and handed it to the king of Shu. He said, "Just in case, the imperial consort and the Chui family have been operating in Shuzhou for more than 10 years. Your Highness, if you let them read this letter, the officials and nobles of Shuzhou will make things convenient for you. Prince He, the king king. I and I he. I. If you can't do this well, you don't have to come back." As soon as he finished speaking, 2 riders separated from the crowd and soon disappeared. In a small courtyard in Willow Lane in the capital, "I heard that the king of Shu will leave the capital today." Xiaocui and Xiaozhu were swinging in the corner. Wan Ruoqing was drying the osmanthus powder at the stone table in the courtyard, and said to Zheng Zumo. They saw it when they passed by the alley just now. Zheng Zumo was focused on peeling melon seeds and said casually, "Last time they were framed and almost imprisoned." After coming to the capital, all kinds of rumors pointed to the king of Shu. How could they not know that he was leaving the capital today? Since they knew that they were likely to be targeted by a prince, they were still very nervous. Only now did they let out a long sigh of relief. Wan Ruoqing and Zheng Zumo were talking about something. Xiaocui swung for a while, and came over to help her move the osmanthus powder to a place where the sun was shining. She wondered why Sister Ruoqing had picked so many osmanthus flowers this year. The osmanthus cake would probably last until this time next year. It was already late autumn, and the atmosphere between heaven and earth was more desolate. The small courtyard was very clean, but the alley outside the courtyard was already covered with a layer of fallen leaves. Not long after it was cleaned, it would be covered again. It was hard to imagine that there would be a tea house in such a secluded alley. Although the place was remote, business was brisk every day. Many people in the capital knew that the owner of the tea house in Willow Lane was an expert in stir-frying tea. Although the price was a little high, it could attract people who truly loved tea. At the entrance of the tea house, there would always be a lazy waiter sitting there. No matter how busy the business was, he would not go in to help. Most of the time he was dozing off. He would only open his eyes when someone approached the small courtyard on the opposite side. "Hey, those two beggars, if you want to beg, go elsewhere." At a certain moment, the tea house waiter stood up and walked over to the two beggars who had been lingering there for a long time. He waved his hand and spoke impatiently. "Why?" one of the beggars said unhappily, and was immediately pulled away by his companion. In terms of size, the tea house waiter's arms were thicker than their thighs. If they really provoked him, a fierce beating was inevitable. Seeing that the two beggars had tactfully left, the waiter returned to his original position and continued to nap. At this time, in a corner outside the alley, two beggars were talking in low voices. "That should be where the Empress lives." The great emissary said that that is the incarnation of the Empress. "We must not disturb her. We also have to tell everyone that if we encounter her in the future, we must not offend her. Let's go back and report to the great emissary first." We found the Empress. The night deepened, but the moonlight was quite bright. The entire capital was enveloped in a layer of brightness. At a certain moment, over 10 figures suddenly appeared in the alley. With the help of the moonlight, it could be seen that everyone was dressed in black, and their faces were covered with black cloths. The person in the lead was leaning against the wall of a certain courtyard. He looked inside coldly, raised a hand, and gently waved it down. "His Highness has ordered that no one be left alive. Kill." As soon as he finished speaking, he leaped high up into the air and climbed onto the courtyard wall. The people behind him murmured and quickly approached the corner of the wall. Whoosh! A voice suddenly rang out in everyone's ears. Then, there was a sharp whistle in the darkness, followed by the dull sound of a heavy object falling to the ground. The person who had just spoken fell from the courtyard wall. An arrow entered the back of his neck and pierced through his throat. He clutched his neck, and after struggling a few times, there was no more movement. An arrow to the throat. Who? After the shock passed, the remaining people immediately became vigilant. With their backs to the courtyard wall, they looked in the direction of the voice. A person holding a bow and arrow jumped down from a nearby tree. The doors of a few houses in the alley opened at the same time. Multiple figures quickly flashed out from inside. "Who are you?" the few people asked coldly as they faced the person holding the bow and arrow from afar. "Kill." The other party did not answer. After a moment of dead silence, someone spoke coldly. Then, there was the dazzling light of weapons being unsheathed. "All of you step back. I'll do it." A person on the other side laughed loudly. He did not fear the dozen people at all. He took out a long knife from his back and charged forward. "Stop trying to be a hero. These people's target are the two ladies. Kill them as soon as possible. Remember to leave them alive." The people behind him really didn't help. Instead, they spread out and each person guarded a direction. There were 2 elites from the heaven rank, and the others were all at the top of the earth rank. There was also a famous master archer in the Jianghu holding the line. If they could not even deal with these small fries, how could they have the face to stay on the hero ranking? Chapter 568. Under the moonlight, the figure wielding the long saber was like a tiger in a flock of sheep. The saber light danced as if it was chopping melons and vegetables. There was not even the sound of weapons clashing. None of the dozen or so black-clothed men were a match for him. As for the man with the longbow, it did not affect his performance at all. He stood in front of the courtyard gate. If someone broke through the defense line of the swordsman, he would casually shoot an arrow. With the sound of the bowstring, someone would fall to the ground clutching his throat. After twitching a few times, there was no more sound. The strange thing was that these people knew they were no match for him, but they did not seem to care. They charged forward without fear of death, even if they were just throwing their lives away. Death warriors. The people surrounding them looked at each other, nodded slightly, and quickly joined the battle. In just a moment, only one of the dozen or so black-clothed men was left standing. A man grabbed the neck of the leader and asked coldly, "Who sent you?" After he asked this question, there was no response for a long time. At this moment, someone walked over and put his finger under the nose of the black-clothed man. He shook his head and complained, "You brat, you don't know how to hold back. He's already been strangled by you, why are you still asking?" The man released his hand, and the black-clothed man's corpse fell straight to the ground. He squatted down and pinched the man's mouth. He stood up, shook his head and said, "He committed suicide by taking poison. Who would be so generous as to send so many death warriors at once?" After years of traveling in Jianghu, they naturally knew of the existence of death warriors. Those nobles' families would usually raise death warriors. These people would work for their master, and were instilled with the idea of loyalty from a young age. For the master's orders, they could even disregard their lives, and carry out most of the missions were assaults or assassinations. Although these people also had their own thoughts, they only knew to be loyal. Even if they learned martial arts from a young age, their achievements were extremely limited. However, when there were a lot of them, their fearless aura would give people a headache. Today, if it were not for the two heaven-ranked experts and the godly archer, the remaining people would not be able to stop them. The blade-wielding man frowned and said, "Call someone over and clean this place up." Before they could do anything, the sound of footsteps came from the entrance of the alley. More than 10 figures quickly walked over. As they got closer, they saw the corpses on the ground. Someone immediately pressed the weapon on his waist and shouted, "Who are you people?" When they saw another person appear, their expressions finally changed. The blade-wielding man saw a gray-robed old man in the crowd, and involuntarily clenched the long blade in his hand. He glanced at the person beside him, and the latter immediately understood. He took 2 steps back, and took out a bamboo tube from his waist. "And who are you?" The man nodded as he looked at the figures in front of him and asked, "This is the work of the Secret Intelligence Bureau. Put down your weapons immediately." Seeing that the courtyard door behind them was not open, the Secret Intelligence Division General, who had spoken, was slightly relieved. He turned to look at the person opposite him, and immediately said, "Secret Intelligence Agency?" Hearing these 3 words, the expression of the knife-wielding man visibly relaxed, but he still looked at him suspiciously and asked, "The Heavenly King covers the Earthly Tiger? We're on the same side." When the people of the Secret Intelligence Division heard this, they immediately put down their weapons. The general was about to step forward when he saw the man opposite him raise his long blade in front of him. After a moment of shock, he said, "Chicken stewed with mushrooms." When the man heard this, he put away his blade and cupped his hands in salute. "Excuse me." The general shook his head and pointed at the corpses on the ground. "It's fine. We should be more vigilant. What exactly is going on here? They're all men of sacrifice." The man glanced at them and said, "Coming at this time should mean harm to the 2 ladies. Since the Secret Intelligence Division is here, I'll leave the rest to you to handle." "That's how it should be." The general nodded and waved his hand at the people behind him. "Bring the corpses back." The emperor attached great importance to the case of the son of the vice minister of the Ministry of Rights. He had strictly ordered the Secret Intelligence Division and the Supreme Court to solve the case within a time limit. However, they had not obtained any useful clues from the Assistant Minister of Justice, so the case had not been solved. The Secret Intelligence Division had been paying attention to the movements here, which was why they had been able to arrive so quickly after discovering the abnormality. Although they had arrived a step too late, and there were only corpses left, for the Secret Intelligence Division, it made no difference whether they were corpses or living people. "It's all thanks to you tonight." The general cupped his hands in salute again. One could imagine that if it weren't for these people, if something had happened to the 2 ladies, not to mention how they would explain it to Lord Li, the punishment from the emperor would probably not be light. The man waved his hand and said, "You're too polite. Our duty is to protect the 2 ladies. However, you need to carefully investigate the identities of these people." The general smiled and said, "Don't worry. Leave the rest to us." The people retreated far away and watched as the figures moved under the moonlight without making too much noise. Soon, all the corpses had been taken away by them. "Here." The general pointed to the ground. One of the men waved his hand and said, "Leave it to us." After the people of the Secret Intelligence Division retreated, faint sounds could be heard again. "We're lucky today. We actually ran into them." I don't know how many points we'll get this time. If we have enough, we'll go ask Miss Lu to give us a few pointers. I really didn't expect to have the opportunity to get pointers from a grandmaster in my lifetime. Haha, good luck to you. Mr. Lu is so stingy. I think you'll have to save up more. It can't be. I killed more than a dozen men of sacrifice this time. Bah, shameless guy. You even want to take credit like this. Not long after, a room in the courtyard was lit up. Xiao Chui came out with a beautiful sheep pillow in her arms. She passed through the moon door and stood in the courtyard for a while. She murmured, "It's so late at night. Why are you making so much noise? Can't you let me sleep?" She complained and yawned again. She could barely keep her eyes open. She turned around and walked back. The only light in the room was quickly extinguished. What's going on? Was there a flood last night? Early in the morning, a sleepy girl opened the courtyard door and stood on the blue stone that had been washed until it was spotless. "Miss Xiao Chui, why did you get up so late today?" A voice came from the front. Xiao Chui turned her head and looked at the lazy waiter sitting in front of the opposite tea house. She curled her lips and said, "I don't know which bastard is making noise in the middle of the night. By the way, has this place been washed?" The waiter nodded, rubbed his shoulders and said, "Yes, the shopkeeper said that it's not clean outside, and it will affect the customer's mood to drink tea. He asked us to wake up before dawn and rinse the entire alley with water. It's really tiring." Xiao Chui did not continue to talk. After thanking him, she turned around and walked into the courtyard. She did not believe the waiter's words. He was the laziest person in the entire alley. He only knew how to sleep all day. How could he suddenly become so diligent? However, after the ground was washed, it looked much more pleasing to the eye. In the Hall of Diligent Government, Emperor Jing was holding a report just presented by the Intelligence Division. He sighed and said, "Is it really Li Xian? I haven't disciplined him all these years. Is it right or wrong?" Murmuring, he crumpled the paper into a ball and threw it aside. He said, "Pass down the order. Tell the Supreme Judiciary and the Intelligence Division to stop investigating this case." "Yes, Your Majesty." Changde bowed and said. The King of Shu's faction had suffered a heavy blow this time. His Majesty's power in the imperial court was almost completely wiped out and almost reached a critical limit. If he suppressed them too much, there would be a big rebound. Emperor Jing thought for a moment and asked, "Is there a vacancy for the position of Minister of the Ministry of Rights?" Changde said, "His Majesty just demoted the Minister of the Ministry of Rights the day before yesterday. He hasn't been appointed yet." Emperor Jing thought for a moment and said, "Forget it. Chen Yunshan is the Minister of the Ministry of Rights. He is no longer loyal to the Chen family. Pass down the order to the Ministry of Personnel. Chen Yunshan will be appointed as Minister of the Ministry of Rights." Chapter 569. The promotion of the Minister Counselor of the Ministry of Rights, Chen Yunshan, was expected by most people. Although the Supreme Court and the Intelligence Bureau had not come to a conclusion on the death of Chen Yunshan's son, it was clear that the King of Shu was the culprit. As soon as the King of Shu left the capital, a dozen suicide soldiers attacked Willow Alley at night. The Intelligence Bureau's actions were seen by Marquis Wu, who was patrolling the streets. There was no way to hide this. However, being banished from the capital was a severe punishment for the King of Shu, who was likely to become the next emperor. His faction had also suffered a heavy blow. Now that he was far away from the capital, if he were to be recalled for investigation, it would cause turmoil in the political situation. The gains would not make up for the losses. After all, although the King of Shu's faction had temporarily lost power in the court, they still had influence that could not be ignored. Thinking about it carefully, the emperor still had a few adult princes. But even when the King of Shu was at his lowest point, the other princes could not compare to his advantage. Therefore, this case could only end here. Chen Yunshan's promotion from the Minister of Rights to the Minister of Rights was probably the emperor's compensation for him. But this road of promotion was too bloody and cruel. Chen Yunshan had already left the King of Shu's faction. It was said that he had almost fallen out with Duke Chen, This was not unexpected. Although he could not take revenge for his son's death, how could he let it go so easily and continue to be loyal to the king of Shu? Over the past few days, he was not the first nor the last to leave the king of Shu's camp. It was just that after this incident, many officials finally saw many things clearly. From indecisiveness, they became firm. Even the attitude of the Qing clan had become vague, causing more people to hesitate. Suicide soldiers? Li Yi unconsciously tapped the table with his index finger, repeating Lu Luo's words. Yes, Lu Luo nodded. Last night, around midnight, a group of black-clothed men sneaked into Willow Alley. Fortunately, we knew that these days were not peaceful. Worried that they would make a move again, we arranged for people to keep watch every night. Those black-clothed men were not afraid of death. We wanted to capture one alive for questioning, but we did not expect the last person to commit suicide by poison. In the end, the corpses were all taken away by the Secret Service. We still don't know the identities of those people. There was nothing much to guess about the identity of the man in black. He did not know how to play tricks, nor did he know how to beat around the bush. Based on his style of doing things, he was undoubtedly the king of Shu. I'm still too soft-hearted. Li Yi sighed and shook his head. The nursery rhymes and the strange omens did not reach the bottom line of the courtiers and the old emperor. Otherwise, the king of Shu would not only be banishment from the capital. However, this guy had been in Jingdo for so long, yet he still hadn't managed to rope in any imperial guards or garrison generals. He also couldn't do anything fatal. A piece of trash. He looked at Lu Luo and asked casually, "We haven't developed to Shuzhou yet, have we?" Lu Luo nodded and said, "Shuzhou is remote. If we go a little deeper, we'll be within the borders of the Zhao kingdom. We don't plan to develop in such a remote prefecture for the time being. The more difficult the conditions, the more we can't shrink back. We have to carry forward the spirit of not being afraid of hardship." Li Yi poured more tea for him and said, "Although Shuzhou is remote, we can't give it up. If anyone is willing to go to Shuzhou to develop, their salary will be tripled, and they will be allowed a month of paid leave every year. They will also be allowed to go home to visit family once." He counted the days and continued, "In 2 years, if they are willing to come back, they will immediately be promoted to the manager of the branch in Jingdo." This kind of treatment was hard to refuse for a wandering actor who called the 4 corners of the world his home. He would only be away for 2 or 3 years. Although Shuzhou was a little remote, the salary was not low. 3 times the salary, a month of leave, and they were allowed to go home to visit family. In this way, he would be gone for at least 3 months. Once the news got out, there would be a lot of applicants. Moreover, in 2 or 3 years, he would be promoted to the manager of the branch in Jingdo. He would not have to worry for the rest of his life. After coming back to his senses, Lu Luo nodded and said, "Okay, I'll arrange it as soon as I go back." "How's the preparation for the heroes competition?" This rare event in the martial arts world would be held in a few days. Lu Luo had been in charge of this aspect. Lu Luo nodded and said, "The preparation is almost done. The ranking on the heaven list has rarely changed in the past 2 days. So far, there hasn't been a single grandmaster. But we can't rule out the possibility that some masters on the heaven list haven't done their best. When the real competition begins, there may be changes." After all, the area around Jingdo was too sensitive. The final venue of the Martial Arts Society competition was dozens of miles away from Jingdo. This competition was not only a competition, but also an exchange. Generally speaking, the martial arts world in Jianghu was an extremely powerful force. Unfortunately, it was like a plate of loose sand, which was difficult to gather. However, if they really gathered, the imperial court would have a headache. Ever since the appearance of the hero list, there had been a slight change in the situation. Although people who practiced martial arts were proud and arrogant, they also respected the strong. Once they were ranked at the top of the heaven list, once their fame spread out, a large number of followers would immediately emerge. Experts who were indifferent would not care about this, but there were also people who took the opportunity to establish their own forces. The number of factions in the martial arts world suddenly increased. Among them, The Lu Alliance was the most powerful one. After all, the top 2 masters on the heaven list were in the Lu Alliance. One of them was even a legendary grandmaster. The chance to receive guidance from a grandmaster was something that many martial arts practitioners dreamed of. Martial arts practitioners from all walks of life swarmed in from all directions. Even though the Lu Alliance's rules for accepting members were very strict, its expansion speed was extremely shocking. Ever since the appearance of the hero list until the heroes competition, the entire martial arts world was slowly stirred up. Although obtaining the position of the chief of the martial arts world might not be able to command the martial arts world, that title was the highest honor for martial arts practitioners. The chief of the martial arts world, the #1 master in the world, was enough to boast for a lifetime. Of course, no matter how much Lee fantasized about it, it was useless. However, Mississippi Lu's Tai Chi was taught by him step by step. A teacher for a day, a teacher for a lifetime. In the future, when he wrote a biography for her, he had to make it clear. The master of the chief of the martial arts world was a truly powerful existence. It would not be enough to boast for 2 lifetimes. The situation in the imperial court changed. Some people left, some people rose. For the people in the capital, this was just a topic of discussion. It didn't take long before something new appeared in 3 to 5 days, causing them to forget about the past. 2 days ago, they were still discussing how foxes talked and who should be the emperor. But these days, the topic of discussion had changed to a few new shows in the brothel. There was a pretty girl who sang, and everyone liked her very much. Everything seemed to have returned to normal. In this tranquility, in a restaurant in the capital, a burly man with a saber on his back raised his head and drank a few mouthfuls of strong wine. He laughed. The capital is indeed the capital. Even the wine is different. Then he threw down a piece of silver, picked up the wine jar, and strode away. Outside the capital, a young man with a sword in his hand stopped a passerby. After asking a few questions, he smiled and thanked the passerby. He looked in a certain direction and quickly disappeared. "Greetings, Your Highness." At the same time, a middle-aged Taoist nun wearing a loose Taoist robe walked out of the courtyard. The 2 people in purple who had been waiting outside the door immediately bowed. Countless figures were rushing toward a certain place outside the capital city. Chapter 570. Second Great Uncle. Get up and get to work. Li Yi stood beside a rocking chair in the courtyard and urged the old man who was lying there. Light snoring sounds came from the rocking chair. The old man seemed to be asleep and did not hear what he said. He turned over and snored even louder. He was old and should exercise more. What was the point of lying down all the time? Li Yi opened a paper bag in his hand and tore off a chicken drumstick to take a bite. He then walked out of the courtyard. Before he stepped out of the door, his hand suddenly felt empty. He turned around and saw Second Great Uncle holding a chicken drumstick. He looked at him and said, "Good lad. You don't know how to show filial respect to the old man first when you have something good." Li Yi said as he walked out. "The Heroes' Conference is starting today. Second Great Uncle, come over after you finish this chicken. Rui and Rui are already waiting." "I'll be coming." The old man got up from the rocking chair and wiped his mouth. He grumbled, "Why do you have to let an old man like me get involved in the affairs of the young? If anything happens to my old arms and legs, I'm afraid I'll have to find 2 old women to take care of me in the future." The Heroes' Conference took more than 3 months to prepare for and hold. Speaking of which, most of the time was spent on the heaven list. This was because only by entering the heaven list would one have the chance to fight for the position of alliance leader. This highlighted the importance of the martial arts world's must-fight list. Every day, there would be new and unknown talents appearing, but they would only appear for a short while and be quickly replaced by others. Compared to 3 months ago, more than half of the names on the heaven ranking list had changed. More and more powerful players had joined in. Some of the names that everyone was familiar with finally began to appear frequently on the list. Now the chivalry ranking list had finally become the chivalry ranking list of the entire world of martial arts. A large empty space that occupied a large area had long been cleared. In the middle was an arena that was as tall as a person. A large empty space was cleared around it. Further away was a spectator stand. Besides, there were a large number of temporary tents in the surroundings. Food and other things were sold in them. There were also some tents for people to rest in. The real competition had yet to begin. Many martial artists from all walks of life were chatting and laughing with each other. However, none of the famous martial artists from the heavenly ranking list were seen. As for the format of the competition, it was based on the Second Hero Conference in The Return of the Condor Heroes. Any expert on the heavenly list could go up the stage. Each round was limited to 2 people, and the loser would lose the right to fight for the position of alliance leader. When there were no more challengers, the person standing on the stage would be the winner. However, the heaven list was just a threshold. The experts on the heaven list had a huge disparity in strength. Most people were just there to serve as foils. They did not even think about fighting for the position of alliance leader. They just wanted to use this opportunity to spar with the world's experts. After all, it was hard to find a real opponent. They could not find such an opportunity in the past. A few people walked over slowly. Lu Luo introduced these things to them. From time to time, people from the Lu League came up to greet them. Mississippi Lu was the leader of the Lu League. As for Rui, although she rarely cared about those things, she was a grandmaster. In the martial arts world, strength was everything. She would be respected wherever she went. Rui still occupied the first place on the heaven list. No one would have the guts to challenge a grandmaster. The second place was Mississippi Lu. As long as she did not meet a grandmaster, she was almost invincible. There are no grandmasters on the heaven list, right? Li turned around and asked Lu Luo. I don't think so. Lu Luo shook his head and said, the number of experts in the Jianghu could be counted on one's fingers. How could it be so easy to meet them? When one reached that level, which one of them did not have an indifferent temperament and pursue a higher level? Why would they participate in the Heroes' Assembly? He had been worried that a grandmaster would come to make trouble, but now it seemed that his worries were completely unnecessary. If not then, Li Yi was relieved. But before he could finish his sentence, he saw a middle-aged Taoist nun walk out of a tent. She glanced in his direction, and her gaze froze for a moment before she turned and left. Li Yi pointed at Taoist nun. Lu Luo glanced at her and said, she only showed up once in Qing'an Prefecture. She defeated a master who was in the top 10 of the heaven list, and was ranked 5th. Although the top 10 of the heaven list changes frequently these days, considering her strength, she is currently ranked 15th. Li Yi turned around and looked at Rui. She shook her head and said, since she is here, I'm afraid she is determined to win the league leader. Rui is no match for her. When the time comes, I'll go. Are you sure you can win? Li Yi looked at her and asked. Rui shook her head and said, I'm not sure I can win. It's only 50-50. A battle between grandmasters must be very dangerous. If you didn't have 100% chance of winning, then don't go. Li Yi pulled second great uncle, who was standing there dozing off, and said, second great uncle, chili chicken, white cut chicken, beggar's chicken, cola chicken, salt baked chicken, saliva chicken, yellow braised chicken, and boy's chicken are different every day. I'll leave the Taoist nun to you. The old man raised his head and looked at Li Yi in disbelief. He asked, there are so many ways to cook chicken? Li Yi nodded and said, there are 81 ways to cook chicken, and I guarantee it won't be the same. One every day, and it will be enough for you to eat until next year. Second great uncle narrowed his eyes and seemed to be thinking. At this moment, a slightly anxious voice came from the side. A young man stopped in front of a hunchbacked, sloppy old man and said, Senior, only experts on the heaven list can enter this place. Please take a rest over there. A strange smile appeared on the old man's face. He said, heaven list? What's that? There's no lack of good food or drinks here, but there's nothing on the other side. Get out of the way. I want to watch the show after I'm full. The young man said, you must enter the heaven list and get a token to enter. A middle-aged man walked out of the tent and asked with a frown, who's making noise outside? What token? The old man asked. The young man pointed to the token on the middle-aged man's waist and said, just like this. The old man waved his hand and said to the middle-aged man, "In that case, this token is mine." He reached out to the middle-aged man's waist. The middle-aged man was stunned for a moment, but he immediately reacted. A trace of anger appeared on his face, and he grabbed the old man's wrist. The next moment he felt a shadow appear in front of him, and at the same time, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. He grunted and took a few steps back. His face was pale, and a trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. He looked at the old man with shock in his eyes. "How is this possible?" Lu Luo's expression changed, and he murmured, "Pang Hui is 18th on the heaven list, but..." A trace of surprise also appeared on Rui's face. "Another one." Li Yi was stunned, and he thought of something, and for a moment, he was stunned on the spot. It can't be, 2 grandmasters are making such a big deal this time? The old man played with the token in his hand and looked at the young man. "Can I go in now?" The young man swallowed and said, "Yes. It should be Su Freak." Inside a tent, Lu Luo put down a thin book in his hand with a worried expression and said, "Including Miss Lu, there are currently 6 known grandmasters in the martial arts world. The others disappeared more than 10 years ago. During these 10 years, there was occasionally news of them. Only this old freak Su is a man of both good and evil, and has left behind many deeds in Jianghu. Although he rarely kills people, many famous masters in Jianghu have had their martial arts crippled by him. When people in Jianghu run into him, they generally avoid him." He sighed and said in a worried tone, "Taoist Nun is already a grandmaster. If Su Freak disturbs the situation, we will no longer be able to control the situation. I wonder if second great uncle can deal with 2 grandmasters alone?" Li Yi thought to himself. Just in case, he should ask the old man first. When he turned around, he was suddenly stunned. Second great uncle. Chapter 571. The inside of the tent was very clean. There was a table in the center with fresh fruits and vegetables. The sloppy old man casually picked a piece and put it in his mouth. He opened the lid of a pot of wine beside him and took a big gulp. He clicked his tongue and said, "Good wine. It's really good wine." After tasting a few more pastries, he lay comfortably on the chair and revealed a strange smile on his old face. "Martial Arts Alliance Master? That's interesting." He reached out to pick up a fragrant chicken on the table. He saw an old man on the other side of the table raising a drumstick and biting it. He shook his head and said, "It's not the right temperature. It's a waste." Then he reached for another drumstick. The sloppy old man's murky eyes suddenly burst with 2 balls of light, and his entire temperament changed. More than 10 years ago, his martial arts had already reached the transcendent realm, which was what people in the martial arts world called the Grandmaster realm. However, he had allowed someone to get close to him without him knowing. Even if the other party was also a Grandmaster, it was impossible for him to do this. The scene before him was extremely strange. He looked at the old man with half-closed eyes and asked warily, "Who are you?" The old man put down the drumstick in his hand and looked up at him. He yawned and asked, "What's your name again?" "Su Xiaoguai." "Su Xiaoguai." Due to the sloppy old man's strange behavior, people in the martial arts world called him Su Xiaoguai. In fact, it was also a form of respect. When had he ever been humiliated like this? "Old thing, you're courting death." Before he finished speaking, an afterimage appeared in the void in front of him. In the blink of an eye, it appeared at the throat of the unfamiliar old man. The next moment, the sloppy old man's ferocious expression froze when he saw the hand that was as dry as tree bark on his wrist. "Old thing." The old man opposite him wiped his hands and opened his half-closed eyes. He looked at the sloppy old man and asked. Rui tugged at Li Yi's sleeve and said, "You don't have to look for him, husband. Second granduncle might have found a place to sleep. He'll come out when the martial arts competition officially starts." "Why do you think second granduncle sleeps so much?" Li Yi was very curious about this. Rui smiled and said, "Second granduncle's kung fu is like that. You don't have to be surprised." Li Yi was surprised. Could it be the sleeping fist? "What is the sleeping fist?" Rui looked at him and asked. "That's not important." Li Yi shook his head and asked, What kind of kung fu needs to sleep for such a long time? I heard from Fong that second granduncle has slept like this for half of his life. It's called the turtle breathing technique, Rui explained. Second granduncle looks like he's sleeping, but he's actually practicing martial arts all the time. Li Yi felt that the name turtle breath skill sounded familiar until he recalled Old Man Chang's unlikable face. Finally, he found some information in his mind. The tortoise breathing technique could increase one's power in one's sleep, and it was even faster than other people's normal cultivation speed. A person who cultivated the tortoise breathing technique might not have any special moves, but as they grew older, the density of their inner force would be enough to scare people to death. More importantly, if one practiced this kung fu, he could really live like a tortoise and easily surpass the threshold of 100 years. Li Yi could understand this point. When a person slept, the body's metabolism would drop to an extremely low level. It should be the same principle in science fiction movies. If that was the case, it was very likely that he would not be able to outlive second granduncle. This was a little too hurtful. Li Yi shook his head. He had to get his hands on that turtle breath skill. When he got back, he would find out all the ways to cook chicken. He would eat 3 different meals a day until second granduncle vomited. He had to learn the turtle breath skill. In a certain tent, the sloppy old man stood upright with his head lowered, his voice trembling. Say, Senior, this junior was blind. Please forgive me. In a certain tent, the sloppy old man stood there with his head lowered, his voice trembling. The old man sitting at the table picked up the chicken drumstick and said, Did you see the Taoist nun outside just now? Yes, I saw her. Thinking of the Taoist nun who made him feel danger, the sloppy old man immediately nodded. The old man asked lazily, When she goes on stage later, you know what to do, right? The sloppy old man looked troubled and said, Senior, then, Taoist nun's strength is not bad. She should also. Halfway through his words, he saw that the horrifying senior's half-squinted eyes were about to open. The sloppy old man trembled and immediately said, Senior, don't worry. I will tie up Taoist nun and bring her to your room tonight. I won't let you down. What? The old man looked up at him. The sloppy old man was stunned and asked tentatively, Then Senior, you mean? At the entrance of the tent, the second great uncle patted the sloppy old man's shoulder and said, Little monster, as a guru expert, you must have some backbone. You will be looked down upon by others like this. When the sloppy old man heard this, he felt his blood boiling in his chest. Backbone? Just now, the martial arts that he had painstakingly practiced for a lifetime were almost crippled. What kind of backbone was he talking about? If it weren't for the fact that he couldn't beat the old monster in front of him, he would have already broken the old man's bones. However, at this moment, the dignified guru expert could only smile and say, Senior, the antidote. When you're done with your business, I will naturally give you the antidote. The old man said lightly, and slowly left with his hands behind his back. He staggered and looked like he was about to die. However, only the sloppy old man knew that if the old man really treated him as someone who had one foot in the grave, even a guru would be in trouble. At this moment, he even wondered if he had really reached the guru realm. The guru realm was already at the top of the martial arts world, and it was difficult to find an opponent. Even if they were at the same level, it would be difficult to determine the winner unless it was a life-and-death battle. However, just now, he had seen what it truly meant to be unstoppable. Although the martial arts that he mainly practiced were on the gentle path, and he was not known for his vigorous inner force, he was still a grandmaster. Even if there was a gap between them, how far could the gap be? However, in that short moment of inner force competition, it was like a river meeting the ocean, collapsing at the first touch. It had to be said that after being in the martial arts world for decades, some of the ideas or beliefs in his heart had suddenly collapsed at that moment. He licked his lips, and there was still a hint of sweetness. The thing that he had just been forced to eat did not taste like poison. However, the more colorless and tasteless it was, the more potent the poison was. As for the bitterness and sweetness, he reached out and touched somewhere between his ribs. There was still some dull pain, which was where the poison had gathered. If he did not get the antidote by this time tomorrow, even if he was a guru expert, he would die from the poison. The sloppy old man's face became gloomy. He glanced in the direction where Taoist nun had just left, then turned around and returned to the tent. If he had known that he would encounter such an old monster today, he wouldn't have bothered watching the show. Regarding the matter of the poison, such an expert wouldn't lie to him. Perhaps only by fighting with that Taoist nun would he have a chance of survival. Second uncle, you're back? Li Yi saw the old man coming in from outside with his hands behind his back. He pointed to the table in front of him and said, "There are 2 chicken legs here still warm." Second uncle waved his hand and said, "Leave them. I'm going to sleep first. Don't call me if there's nothing important." Then, he lay down on the simple bed in the tent. The next moment, there was a sound of snoring. Li Yi felt strange that second uncle could resist the temptation of the chicken legs. He glanced over and thought that the quality of his sleep was really enviable. Chapter 572. Heroes from all walks of life. Good men. I'm not talented, but I'm honored to have all of you here today. Li Yi and Rui sat on the spectator stand. There was still some time before the hero conference started. Lu Luo walked to the front of the stage. With the help of his inner force, his voice rang in everyone's ears. It had to be said that this martial arts master was indeed powerful. He completely eliminated the need for a microphone and sound system. His voice was surrounded by 3D sound without any blind spots. His omnipotent inner force was truly black technology. As the organizer of this hero conference, Mississippi Lu was generous for once. The venue was provided by the Lu League, and the volunteers were all members of the Lu League. The masters on the heaven list were also provided with free fruit platters. Of course, whether it was the venue, the tents, or even the tags on their waists, or the plates with fruits, they all had the Lu League's logo. This time, the Lu League really showed its face in front of all the heroes in the world. It officially entered everyone's sight. In the Lu League, the most mysterious person was of course Rui. Although she rarely appeared in front of everyone, the strength of a grandmaster was still there. It was a reassurance to everyone, and it was also the most important factor that attracted countless masters to join her. Mississippi Lu had more opportunities to appear in public. She led a group of women to climb the rankings all day long. She personally trained a group of female heroes and swordsmen who were not inferior to men. As for the overall management and the matters of appearing in public, it was all handed over to Lu Luo. Li Yi himself did not expect that the man that he had accidentally saved in Qing and prefecture was also a martial arts master. He had a certain level of fame in the martial arts world. After Lu Luo recovered, he easily climbed to the top of the heaven list with his own strength. Recently, he had been taking care of the huge Lu League and the matters of the hero ranking. He appeared frequently in front of everyone and was very trustworthy in the hearts of the martial arts world. Now the area that he was in charge of had been completely separated from the brothel. The purpose of the Lu League's existence was not just to rank the rankings. Although it was difficult to recruit the top experts on the heaven list, in general, the Lu League occupied more than 10 spots in the entire heaven list. Coupled with the title of a grandmaster, the current Lu Meng had become somewhat of a deterrent in the martial arts world. Lu Luo was still on the stage. He looked at the crowd with a smile and said, "Today, all the heroes of the world have gathered here. This is a rare event in the martial arts world for hundreds of years. Although the martial arts world is vast, it has been like a plate of loose sand for the past hundreds of years. It has been chaotic and difficult to unite. Today, at the request of the martial arts world, we are holding a heroes' assembly here to elect a leader of the martial arts world. Since it was a martial arts competition, and not a fight to the death, friendship came first and competition came second. Naturally, they couldn't go all out right from the start. They had to at least do enough foreplay. The selection of the Alliance Master this time was not based on a whim to see who was the strongest. The people did not call him the Alliance Master for nothing. As the Alliance Master, he had to fight for the welfare of the entire world of martial artists. He had to uphold justice and get rid of evil. He had to be concerned about the lonely old swordsmen's retired lives. He had to attack the evil forces in the world of martial artists and lead everyone toward socialism. As soon as Lu Luo finished speaking, someone below immediately spoke up. What else is there to choose? I think Master Liu is very suitable. Why don't you be the alliance leader? I think Senior Chen is the most qualified. In my opinion, the position of the alliance master should be chosen between the two heroines Lu. Don't you think so? Everyone quiet. Seeing the commotion below, Lu Luo raised his hand and gestured for the crowd to calm down. He said, since you are the alliance master of the martial arts world, you naturally have to be able to convince the masses with your martial arts. Otherwise, this heroes' assembly will be meaningless. Today's competition is for everyone to learn from each other. Don't overdo it. Lu Luo walked down from the stage and said, time is almost up. I won't say anything else. On the heaven leaderboard, which hero is willing to be the first to come up? I'll do it. As soon as he finished speaking, a figure flew directly onto the stage and made a dull thud. A man with a huge saber on his back caught the long saber on his back and said with a smile, Heaven leaderboard number 39 Yu Gang. Which hero is willing to fight me? I'm not talented. I'd like to seek advice from Brother Yu. A young man dressed in a green robe lightly tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and floated onto the stage. He held his sword with both hands and bowed to the man. Excuse me. After the two of them greeted each other, the young man smiled and unsheathed his long sword. Suddenly, a shadow of a sword appeared in front of him. Good move. The big man shouted loudly. He swung his heavy and huge saber, leaving after images. He moved forward with an unstoppable force, as if he wanted to break the shadow of the sword with one strike. The cheers from below continued. Even though they had seen battles that were more thrilling and exciting than this one many times in the past few months, the significance of this one was extraordinary. The battle for the leader of the martial arts circle had not been seen in the Jianghu for hundreds of years. The battles today would definitely be remembered by the people. Such an expert is only ranked number 39. Li Yi was slightly stunned as he watched from below. He turned his head to look at Rui, and then at Mississippi Lu. In his heart, his understanding of their abilities increased by a few levels. Lu Luo explained in a low voice. The hero ranking now truly encompasses the entire martial arts world. It is far from what it was in Qing'an Prefecture. On the other side of the grandstand, the middle-aged Taoist nun stood with her hands behind her back. Behind her stood two men in purple, and beside her was a young man. They looked at the stage with disdain. Feeling the powerful auras coming from here, the middle-aged Taoist nun's eyes flashed with a strange light. She tilted her head slightly to look in a certain direction. The woman was talking to the young man beside her called Li Yi. After a moment, she moved her gaze away, but the horsetail whisk in her hand slightly tightened. Suddenly, as if she felt something, she raised her head to look in a direction opposite her. There was a hubbub of voices there. Everyone was nervously watching the battle on the stage. After looking a few more times, they withdrew their gazes. At that moment, behind the hubbub of voices, the slovenly old man fiercely bit into the chicken drumstick in his hand. His expression was extremely gloomy. Damn Taoist nun, he said hatefully as he threw away the chicken bone. For many people, this battle for the position of alliance leader was just a participation. After all, those at the bottom of the heaven list would not be able to emerge victorious against so many people. However, this arena was a chance for them. A chance to spar with experts of the same realm. A chance to make a name for themselves. All the people in the arena were famous masters in the martial arts world. There were people around to record the process of the battle. After the battle ended, such a battle would be spread out in the form of words, and their names would also be known by more people. In a battle between experts, the slightest mistake could lead to a huge loss. The man with the long blade on his back was quickly swept out by the young man with superb swordsmanship. The young man did not last long before he was replaced by someone else. True experts knew how to preserve their strength. Thus, those at the top of the heaven list did not make their moves early. Most of the people in the arena were ranked at the bottom, so there would not be a situation where someone was swept away. In just a short half an hour, Li felt that his horizons were broadened. All kinds of magical moves and weapons emerged one after another. Although he was only considered half an expert, he could tell that a few of the battles were really exciting. It was much more exciting than watching a show at a brothel. The further the battle went, the stronger the strength of the people who made their moves. When an expert in the top 30 of the heaven list finally went up to the stage, Li saw Yang Liuqing walk out from behind Mississippi Liu and float up to the stage. She looked at the man in purple opposite her and said, "Yang Liuqing, please advise me." Chapter 573. Miss Yang has progressed rapidly and is now ranked 27th on the heaven roll. The purple-clothed man she fought is ranked 25th on the heaven roll. The two of them fought before, and Miss Yang lost in one move. It's a pity. Yang Liuqing's moves were quite beautiful, resembling the second young mistress of Lu family. She also used a sword. Lu Luo explained from the side. Li himself could not tell who was stronger between the two. They were exchanging blows, and it seemed like the difference in strength was not that big. Second Miss Lu loved her only apprentice very much. Although they were about the same age, she usually put on airs as a master. She always looked cold and cool. She was the number one in the world. Except for Rui, she didn't care about anyone else. Of course, Li already knew that she was cold on the outside, but warm on the inside. She was dedicated to teaching her disciple. She slept with Xiao Huan at night and wore pink undergarments. Most importantly, if she was as cold on the inside as she looked, he wouldn't be alive today. After wandering for a while, when he looked up again, Yang Liuqing had already flicked the purple-clothed man's weapon away. His sword was so sharp that the purple-clothed man took a few steps back and finally fell off the platform. Yang Liuqing cupped his hands and said, "Thank you for letting me win." Li looked at the cold expression on the young girl's face. Compared to a year ago, she looked much more mature. He thought to himself that it was true that the disciple was like the master. A year ago, although she was silly, she had a firm will and practiced without a care for her life. It seemed that in the blink of an eye, she had turned into the person she was today. Even Lu Luo couldn't help but praise. Miss Yang's talent in martial arts is really amazing. It's only been a few days, and your ranking has risen by 2 places. The purple-clothed man retreated to the middle-aged Taoist nun's side. Li saw the young man beside Taoist nun say a few words to her, and went straight up the platform. He looked at Yang Liuqing and cupped his hands. "I am Fang Yu. Please enlighten me, miss." Seeing that this young man was at most the same age as him, but he was actually able to enter the heaven roll, and from the looks of it, he was even slightly higher up. Li could not help but feel a blow in his heart. As if sensing his emotions, Rui squeezed his hand. Li turned back to look at her, and the next moment, he couldn't help laughing. He had only been in this world for slightly more than a year, and he had been practicing martial arts for 3 days and 2 days. Wasn't it looking for trouble to compete with others in martial arts? Besides, no matter how powerful they were they as powerful as Rui? Were they as powerful as Rui? They were so skinny that a gust of wind could blow them over. Fang could probably kill them with one punch. On the other side of the stage, the young man was holding a folding fan made of an unknown material. It was not damaged in the slightest when the sword slashed at it. With just this fan, he was able to completely suppress Yang Liuqing. Clearly, there was still a gap between the two of them. Bah! Holding a broken fan, and pretending to be a Mongolian prince. This pretty boy is actually stronger than Miss Qing. Someone in the audience curled his lips in disdain. It was obvious that he had already memorized the plot of the hero assembly in The Return of the Condor Heroes. As soon as he finished speaking, the young man's fan flew out of the stage. Yang Liuqing's sword was placed on the young man's neck, and after a moment he pulled it back and said, "Thank you for letting me win." Even when he got off the stage, the young man's face still had a look of disbelief. "Protector, that woman's martial arts are strange." The purple-clothed man who had just been defeated looked at the stage and said. A trace of annoyance appeared on the young man's face. He was extremely puzzled by the strange martial arts that she had suddenly used. He turned his head and asked the middle-aged Taoist nun, "Aunt, what kind of martial arts does that woman's martial arts actually belong to?" The middle-aged Taoist nun muttered to herself for a moment and said, "The martial arts that she has learned are heterogeneous. Just now, most of the martial arts that she used were from the Liu family. More than 20 years ago, Liu Qing relied on this to stand alone in Jianghu and consecutively defeated 2 famous grandmasters. He is publicly recognized as the #1 expert in the world of Jianghu. Although the martial arts that this woman used are also from the Liu family, her inner strength is too weak. Compared to Liu Qing, it is still far from being able to compare. As for the move that you used to lose just now, I couldn't see the technique. Who is Liu Qing?" The young man was stunned when he heard this. He could hear that when his aunt said this name, there was an indescribable fear in her voice. But why had he never heard of such an expert? "When he disappeared from Jianghu, you weren't even born yet," the Taoist nun said. Her gaze shifted back to the stage, and she didn't say anything else. On the other side, the sloppy old man looked at the young woman on the stage with a face full of suspicion. "The Liu family? What is her relationship with Liu Qing?" He looked at the stage again, and his eyes immediately widened. "Cloud-piercing sword. How does she know the move that old man Yang Wanli is famous for?" "Yangliuking Yang Wanli." The sloppy old man muttered these 2 names. When he looked at the stage again, his gaze suddenly changed. "Could it be that she is?" Yangliuking came down from the stage and walked in front of Mississippi Liu. She lowered her head and said, "Master, I'm sorry. I lost." Li waved his hand and said, "That's enough. You even defeated the 23rd on the heaven roll. It's not like you've never lost before. It's not like your master hasn't lost before. After the match, just watch from below." In the end, Yangliuking still lost in the 3rd round. The expert who entered the top 20 on the heaven roll easily defeated her. There was still a big gap between her and the true experts on the heaven roll. Mississippi Liu glanced at him, but didn't say anything. There were many surprises in the subsequent matches. For example, an expert in the top 20 on the heaven roll was defeated by a newcomer who barely made it on the list. At this point, no one would hide their strength anymore. In every match, no matter how fast or slow it was, there would always be one person who was eliminated. When an expert in the top 10 swept away several experts, no one else went up to the stage easily. The people on the stage shouted twice, but no one went up to the stage. Mississippi Liu took a step forward, but was pulled back by Li. "What's the hurry? Taoist nun hasn't gone up yet. It's too early to go up now." Li looked around and asked, "Where's second granduncle? Did he oversleep? Should I get someone to wake him up?" As soon as he finished speaking, he heard a soft sound. It was obviously the sound of someone landing on the stage. Li turned his head and saw Taoist nun standing on the stage, holding a horsetail whisk in her hand. There was a moment of silence, and then it immediately became noisy. "I know her. When this Taoist nun was in Qing'an Prefecture, she defeated an expert ranked 11th on the heaven roll with 1 move. Although the person ranked 11th back then can't be compared to now, it still shows that this Taoist nun definitely has terrifying strength. So what? Although Senior Feng is ranked 8th on the heaven roll, it's not difficult for him to defeat the person ranked 11th back then. Sigh, you guys didn't see what happened that day with your own eyes. Anyway, Hero Feng is in danger this time." The man on the stage was not disturbed by the people below. He cupped his fist slightly and said, "Feng Lang, please advise me. Make your move." Taoist nun had no intention of introducing herself and said calmly. The man named Feng Lang frowned slightly, but his expression quickly calmed down. He cupped his sword and said, "Thank you for letting me win." As soon as he finished speaking, the sword flashed. The middle-aged Taoist nun waved her hand, and the horsetail whisk wrapped around the man's hand. In the next moment his sword flew out. In the next moment he was sent flying. Feng Lang landed below the stage, and took a few steps back to dissipate the huge force. He raised his head abruptly, and looked up with a solemn gaze. "A grandmaster? A grandmaster?" The crowd watching the battle below suddenly fell silent. They had originally thought that there was only one Grandmaster on the heaven roll. If heroine Lu, who had never made a move, wanted to fight for the position of alliance leader, no one would be able to defeat her. But now, before she even made a move, another Grandmaster had appeared. What was there left for them to play? Feng Lang, who was ranked 8th on the heaven roll, did not even have the strength to fight back. If this was not a Grandmaster, what was it? One should know that when he had challenged Mississippi Lu, he had withstood 50 moves before being defeated. Next to the two men in purple, the young man looked around with a mocking expression. Mississippi Lu's expression was calm, but her fists were tightly clenched in her sleeves. As Rui slowly stood up, Li Yi held her hand. He stood up as well, and turned to look at Rui. He said, Let second granduncle do it. Chapter 574. As soon as he finished speaking, he was hit on the head. Second great-uncle found a drumstick out of nowhere, and sat on the seat that Lu Luo vacated. He shook his head and said, The chair at home is still more comfortable. Li rubbed his head and pointed at the Taoist nun on the stage. The old woman waved her hand and said, Young people should be patient and watch carefully. A Grandmaster? Let me see just how powerful a Grandmaster is. At this moment, a strong voice came from below. A tall, thin man in his 40s jumped onto the stage and cupped his hands at Taoist nun. Linley, he's on the stage so early. If there's no Grandmaster participating, he has a high chance of winning the position of alliance leader. I don't know if this Taoist nun is a Grandmaster. If she's really at that level, even Hero Lin has no chance of winning. The gap between a top-notch expert and a Grandmaster seems to be only a thin line. But in fact, it's a whole different world. It's even bigger than the gap between the 5 masters and the first-rate experts, as described in the legend of Condor shooting. Listening to the discussions around him, Li Yi turned to look at Lu Luo. Before he could speak, Lu Luo explained, The person on the stage is called Linley. He's the most powerful dark horse in the past few months. In more than 10 matches, he hasn't lost a single one, except by the hands of second Mississippi. He's currently ranked 3rd on the heaven list. Li looked at the stage. If he was ranked 3rd on the heaven list, he shouldn't be too far away from Mississippi Lu. If he was still defeated by this Taoist nun, even if Mississippi Lu went on the stage, it wouldn't make much of a difference. Excuse me. After all, the scene just now was a little shocking. Linley naturally wouldn't underestimate her. After cupping his hands in greeting, he suddenly stomped his feet and dashed toward the opposite side. Taoist nun's expression didn't change. She looked at the rapidly approaching figure, not even the slightest change in her eyes. However, when he was about to get close, the horsetail whisk in his hand finally moved. At this moment, there was not the slightest noise below the stage. Everyone held their breaths in rapt attention, fearing that they would miss a single detail. They did not even blink. Linley, who was ranked 3rd on the heaven leaderboard, made every move that he made was extremely fierce and full of killing intent. On the other hand, Taoist nun looked like she was taking a leisurely stroll in the park. She would occasionally wave the horsetail whisk in her hand and easily dissolve his killer moves. At this point, everyone didn't doubt her cultivation realm in the slightest. Li easily caught the hint of annoyance on Mississippi Lu's face. It made sense. They were both women, but this Taoist nun was too much of a blow. However, Mississippi Lu was young after all. When she reached the age of Taoist nun, she might not be able to beat her, but she would definitely be prettier than her. A bunch of idiots. The young man beside the 2 purple-clothed men curled his lips and muttered disdainfully. The Holy Religion was determined to win the position of the leader of the Wulin Alliance, and had been planning for at least half a year. So how could she let others interfere? The crowd cried out in surprise at the next moment. The man named Linley drew an arc in the air, his body tumbling a few times before he landed steadily on the ground. A hint of admiration appeared on his face. He cupped his hands and said, "Thank you for showing mercy, Senior." Taoist nun glanced at him, put away her horsetail whisk and said calmly, "Who else?" There was silence below the stage. Even Linley, who was ranked third on the heaven leaderboard, had been defeated so thoroughly. Who else would dare to go up? In today's arena, perhaps only heroine Lu, who was also a grandmaster, had the right to stand on the same stage as her. However, heroine Lu had a calm personality and was not interested in the matters of the Wuling Alliance. She did not seem to have any intention of going up on stage today. At this moment, when everyone looked at Taoist Nun on the stage again, their gazes immediately changed. Being unperturbed and calm, this was the demeanor of a grandmaster. At this moment, a man in purple walked to the front and said, "If no one goes up on stage, the leader of the Wuling Alliance." Rui stood up from her seat. Second great-uncle threw away the chicken bone in his hand and said with a smile, "There's no hurry. Unfortunately, I also want to fight for the position of the Wuling Alliance." An old voice rang in everyone's ears, and in the next moment, another figure appeared on the stage. Many people rubbed their eyes, feeling very confused. When did this old man go up there? Monster Su. Lulua was still curious about where the biggest unstable factor had gone. At this moment, he finally understood that he was here today to fight for the position of the Wuling Alliance. 2 grandmasters. In this case, there would be a lot of fun today. Li looked back at second great-uncle and asked uncertainly, "One of us?" The old man waved his hand. "Spicy chicken, boiled chicken, beggar's chicken, cola chicken, salt-baked chicken, saliva chicken, yellow braised chicken and virgin chicken. It's a different dish every day. If you can't make it, watch your ass." Virgin chicken was nothing. If he could win over this Taoist nun, he could even ask the cook to make virgin eggs for him every day. Li Yi turned his head, ready to watch the show. On the stage, the sloppy old man threw a plate over to prove his identity. Many people saw the number 18 written on the plate. Isn't it Peng Hui who ranked 18th on the heaven list? Where did this old man come from? Could it be that this old man defeated Peng Hui and replaced him? But even if he's ranked 18th on the heaven list, he's no match for that senior. He knows that he's the senior, but he still wants to fight. Is this old man crazy? The sloppy old man ignored the voices below the stage. After glancing in a certain direction, he immediately withdrew his gaze. When he looked at Taoist Nun, his eyes became fierce. Looking at the sloppy old man opposite her, the indifference on the middle-aged Taoist nun's face finally disappeared. "Please." She waved her horsetail whisk. Her expression was much more serious than before. As soon as he finished speaking, the old man's figure disappeared from where he stood. The middle-aged Taoist nun raised her palm, and a fist appeared in her palm. Both of them took a few steps back at the same time. The old man licked his lips, and a ruthless expression appeared on his face. His figure shook again, and several afterimages appeared in the field. This old man, why doesn't he even have a weapon? The voice below the stage stopped abruptly, and the atmosphere became quiet again. With their eyesight, most of them could no longer see the 2 figures on the stage clearly. It was different from what they had imagined. The reckless old man did not lose immediately, and the Grandmaster Senior was not as calm as before. Only a Grandmaster could fight a Grandmaster to this extent. 2 Grandmasters. Everyone immediately sat up straight. To be able to see a Grandmaster in action was already a blessing of 3 lifetimes. 2 Grandmaster experts fighting for the master of the martial arts world on the same stage. Who among them had seen this before? If word of what happened today were to spread, those who did not participate in the heroes' meet would probably be filled with regret. The people below the stage did not even blink. Even though they could not see the process of the two's fight clearly most of the time, they could still tell others about it in the future. They could pat their chests and describe the battle between grandmasters that they had seen. It was truly exquisite and peerless. As expected of grandmaster experts, the 2 of them waved their hands, which contained the heavenly Tao, and fought until the heavens and earth lost their color, and the sun and moon lost their light. On the stage, the middle-aged Taoist nun forced the sloppy old man back again. Her expression was calm, but her hands, which were hidden in her sleeves, were trembling slightly. She glanced at the ferocious-looking old man, feeling shocked and doubtful. The grandmaster opposite her was obviously the same as her. He cultivated in martial arts, and it was difficult for him to win with his inner force. Moreover, he was old and his strength was waning. At the same level, he should have more of an advantage in experience. But in the few moves they'd exchanged earlier, Chunshi had actually completely abandoned this advantage, and he'd used his full strength every single time, forcing him to have no choice but to deal with him with his full strength. If he was the slightest bit careless, then he'd probably lose at Chunshi's hands. Under such ferocious attacks, the blood in her body was in turmoil, and she felt extremely uncomfortable. After a while, seeing that the sloppy old man did not change his attacks, the middle-aged Taoist nun swallowed a mouthful of blood without a trace. Her expression gradually darkened. Such a battle would hurt both the opponent and herself. Could it be that the grandmaster opposite her was a lunatic? Then why was the position of the master of the martial arts world so attractive to him? He's already so old, but he's really fighting hard. Even an amateur like Li Yi could tell that the old man was truly fighting with his life. He could not help but sigh. Chapter 575. So this is a battle between grandmasters? As the crowd watched, doubts began to surface in their minds. The fight between two grandmasters did not seem to be as exciting as they had imagined. Apart from being faster and having a more violent fighting style, the moves were not that extraordinary. They were even far inferior to those on the heaven list. Just as the crowd was feeling puzzled, someone suddenly said, "Return to simplicity, return to simplicity, I understand now. This is a grandmaster, this is a grandmaster." The people who heard this were stunned. After a while, when they looked at the stage again, they could not help but be in awe. Returning to simplicity was a description of a grandmaster in the martial arts world. However, because grandmasters were hard to find, many people did not know what they meant. At this moment, with someone's reminder, it was as if they had been enlightened and had a sudden realization. Abandoning all fancy moves, fists were fists, palms were palms. It seemed ordinary, but it was already the ultimate realm of returning to simplicity. This was a grandmaster, a true grandmaster. When the middle-aged Taoist nun took a few steps back again, a trace of blood seeped from the corner of her mouth. Her lips moved slightly, and within a very small range, a voice could be heard. "If this goes on, both sides will suffer. If you give up the position of alliance leader, I will reward you handsomely." The old man's body froze. The next moment, the middle-aged Taoist nun saw another fist enlarging in front of her eyes. "If you don't want to fight, then admit defeat. Stop talking nonsense." The unkempt old man snorted coldly, but his moves were even fiercer and more violent. The middle-aged Taoist nun saw that he seemed to have gone crazy, but she did not know that he was secretly complaining. If it was not necessary, who would be willing to fight a grandmaster to the death? In this battle, he could not back down at all. If he did, he would die. Even if the old monster spared him, that poisoned grandmasters were still human, and they would die if they were poisoned. Taoist nun finally knew that there was no room for negotiation. However, she knew better than anyone how big the martial arts world was, and how important the title of alliance leader was. With such power and the holy religion, the things she wanted to do would be shortened by many years. For this, he had endured for decades. How could he give up at the critical moment? She glanced at the sloppy old man and suddenly flicked her sleeves. The horsetail whisk flew out from her hand and sank a few inches into the surrounding pillars. Her clothes fluttered without any wind, as if there was an extremely terrifying aura brewing within her body. Everyone below the stage held their breaths. Those who were slightly weaker, under this aura, all turned pale. When the sloppy old man saw this, his face turned serious. A rare look of seriousness appeared on his face. He clenched his fist, and the muscles on one of his arms bulged, causing his sleeves to burst open. At a certain moment, he suddenly took a step to the side and punched the void to the side. With a rumbling sound, wood splinters flew under his feet. The entire arena shook a few times and tilted slightly to one side. Taoist nun's figure gradually dissipated on the spot and appeared in front of the old man. When everyone's eyes caught this scene, her next palm was already aimed at the old man's chest. Many people in the arena were dumbfounded as they watched the arena tilt to one side. Li was also shocked by the scene in front of him. Damn it, are they sure they're not filming a TV series? Rui said softly. That old man is old and weak after all. They're both gurus, but his strength is slightly inferior to Taoist nuns. Li tilted his head and looked at second great uncle. Old and weak did not seem to be appropriate to describe an old man like him. At this moment, most of the people were able to tell that the old man was at a disadvantage in the end. Faced with the palm that was aimed at his chest, a trace of ruthlessness appeared on the old man's face. He did not dodge at all and punched at Taoist nun's face. He doesn't want to live. The expression of the young man next to the purple-robed man changed. This old man's move was clearly a suicidal move. Bang! After a muffled sound, the old man coughed up a mouthful of blood and retreated a few steps. His face instantly turned pale. As for the Taoist nun, although she had injured him, she was also forced back by the punch. Her body arced through the air as she flew backward and landed solidly on the stage. According to the rules of the battle, landing outside the arena was considered a loss. The middle-aged Taoist nun took a deep look at the stage before turning around and leaving. She was willing to risk her life to force herself to step down from the stage. The two purple-robed men and the young man also looked at the arena. The expressions on their faces froze, followed by a strong sense of disbelief. Not long after, they glared fiercely at the old man in the arena and chased after Taoist nun. The expressions of everyone in the arena were a little complicated. If it was a real fight to the death, the old man in the arena would probably be dead. After all, although Taoist nun had been forced back, she was not injured. If they were to fight again, the result would definitely be different. However, this was an arena battle. There were rules that could not be changed. Landing outside the arena was considered a loss. In this way, Taoist nun had lost. The old man seemed to be seriously injured. He stood on the arena, his body swaying slightly. He looked fiercely at the audience and said, "Who else wants to come up?" The audience was silent. An injured grandmaster was still a grandmaster. He was still not someone ordinary people could defeat. However, the temptation of being the chief of the martial arts world was not small. After a moment of silence, someone jumped onto the arena and said, "I'm Chu Feng, ranked 7th on the heaven roll. I'm willing to exchange pointers with the senior." Bang! As soon as he finished speaking, Chu Feng's body flew backward and spat out a few mouthfuls of blood. After landing on the ground, he was motionless. It was unknown whether he was dead or alive. The old man stood on the arena and looked down. He laughed and said, "Who else?" Another person below gritted his teeth and said, "I never thought I would have the chance to fight with a grandmaster in this life. Heaven roll number 5, please enlighten me." The heaven roll number 5 lay where the heaven roll number 7 was. He struggled a few times, but eventually stopped moving. Blood flowed from the corner of the old man's mouth. He laughed and said, "Who else?" Heaven roll number 4, please enlighten me. Looking at the heaven roll number 4, the audience sighed in their hearts. A grandmaster was a grandmaster after all. Even though he was injured, there was still a world of difference between him and the experts on the heaven roll. Even the second Miss Lu might not be his match. Today, unless her sister made a move, the chief of the martial arts world would be the senior on the arena. Lu Luo looked at the old man and shook his head. That palm just now avoided a vital point. It's far from fatal. A grandmaster is indeed terrifying. Mississippi Lu clenched the autumn water in her hand and slowly walked onto the arena, under the watchful eyes of the audience. Lu Luo was slightly stunned. He immediately turned around and said worriedly, "He still has most of his strength. The second miss. Don't worry." Li Yi turned back and smiled at him. "He's one of us." Lu Luo was startled again. He pondered over Li Yi's words and looked at the old man on the arena. He then thought about the previous situation and murmured, "It can't be. It's Miss Lu. Even if it's Miss Lu, she won't be able to win. This senior is ruthless. I'm afraid Miss Lu, senior. I remember now. He's Freak Sue." Mississippi Lu was obviously very popular in the martial arts world. As soon as she walked onto the arena, There was an uproar from below. The sloppy old man on the arena let out a long sigh of relief when he saw her walking onto the arena. I'm done. He dusted his butt and jumped off the arena. He walked out of the arena and soon disappeared from everyone's sight. Chapter 576. He's admitting defeat just like that. The sloppy old man patted his butt and left, not taking a single cloud with him. Countless people looked at each other in dismay, not knowing what exactly was going on. If Su had not interfered, the Taoist nun would have been the alliance master of the Wulin today. However, he had eliminated Taoist nun at the risk of being injured, and he had also defeated the top few experts on the heaven leaderboard. It seemed that he would not stop until he had obtained the position of alliance master. As long as he defeated second Miss Liu, the position of alliance master of the Wulin would be in his hands. How could he admit defeat and leave at this time? This was basically giving away the position of alliance master. It was said that Su Guai was eccentric and did things differently from ordinary people. It seemed that the rumors were true. Heroine Liu. Just as everyone was wondering and exclaiming, a sudden shout came from below the stage. Alliance Master Liu. Soon it became two shouts. Heroine Liu, Alliance Master of the Wulin. Alliance Master Liu. Alliance Master Liu. It was only then that everyone came to their senses. No matter what, since Su blamed them for leaving, according to the rules, it was counted as his loss. There were still a few experts on the heaven leaderboard who had not entered the stage, but they were ranked in the middle. They were not even qualified to compete with second Miss Liu. Who else could it be other than her? If the two grandmasters did not appear today, there was a 90% chance that the alliance master would be Liu. Even if Su Guai defeated second Miss Liu, he would definitely not be a match for another grandmaster at his peak. She was the second on the heaven leaderboard, had a sister in the grandmaster realm, and was the leader of the Liu alliance. Although she was only a woman, most people were convinced that she had become the alliance master of the Wulin. Alliance Master Liu. Alliance Master Liu. As the voices spread, more and more people began to shout. Who's the one who arranged this? The voices around them were getting louder and louder. Li Yi was stunned when he saw Lu Luo whisper something into someone's ear and walk over. How did second great-uncle make that old man work so hard? It was still noisy outside. Li Yi sat in the spacious tent, passed the peeled apple to Ru Yi, and asked in confusion. As a grandmaster, he didn't hesitate to get injured to clear the path for Mississippi Liu. What was he after? As expected, the thoughts of the elderly could not be speculated with common sense. Rui smiled and cut a piece of apple for Li Yi, saying, second granduncle should have his own way. Old monster. Old senior. In another tent, the sloppy old man's face was pale. He stood in front of second great-uncle and said in a trembling voice, Senior, I've done what you asked me to do. The antidote. What's the hurry? The old man said lazily. Do you think I'll lie to you? The sloppy old man smiled embarrassedly and said, Senior's martial arts are unparalleled. Naturally, you won't lie to me. Second great-uncle glanced at him and took out a milky white square object the size of a fingernail. He threw it over and said, Eat it. The sloppy old man quickly caught it. When he saw what was in his hand, he couldn't help but be stunned. No matter how he looked at it, the thing in his hand was the poison he had just eaten. Senior, this. The sloppy old man looked at him and said in disbelief, This is what I just ate. Just eat it. Don't talk so much nonsense. Second great-uncle glanced at him and said, Have you heard of fighting poison with poison? The sloppy old man stood where he was and looked uncertain for a long time. If he didn't eat it, he would definitely not live past this time tomorrow. If he ate it, it was clearly the poison he had just eaten. If he ate it, he might not even live through the night. Finally, he gritted his teeth and put it in his mouth. Because he didn't have a second choice. He couldn't beat this old monster. If the old monster wanted to kill him, there was no need to go through so much trouble. He could only do as he said. Second great-uncle glanced at him and asked, How is it? Sweet. The sloppy old man nodded. He didn't know where this poison was extracted from, but it was actually so sweet, and had a faint milky fragrance. Disregarding the toxicity, just from the taste alone, it was the first time he had tasted such a sweet poison in his dozens of years of life. Brat, you put less sugar this time. Otherwise it could be sweeter. Second great uncle took out another one, and put it in his mouth with a satisfied expression on his face. Seeing this, the sloppy old man was stunned. Say, senior, who are you? Second great uncle looked at him with dissatisfaction and said, You've eaten the candy. Why don't you leave and wait for me to send you off? The sloppy old man asked in disbelief. It's not poison? This old man has nothing better to do after eating. Why would he carry poison with him? Second great uncle looked up at him, as if he was looking at a mentally retarded person. The sloppy old man pointed to his waist and said, Then why here? Second great uncle stretched out 2 fingers and poked another part of his waist and asked, Does it hurt? The sloppy old man gasped. It hurts. It hurts when you poke me too. Second great uncle waved his hand and said, Go. I won't keep you for dinner. The sloppy old man walked outside in a daze. Today's encounter was really full of twists and turns. He thought he was poisoned, and in order to get the antidote, he risked his life to win against the Taoist nun. The injury he suffered this time would probably take more than half a year to completely recover. In the end, he found out that he had only eaten a piece of candy. At this time, the feelings in his heart couldn't be described in words. When he walked to the door, he seemed to think of something. He suddenly turned around and asked tentatively, Senior, may I ask, what realm are you in now? He originally thought that the Supreme Master was the end of martial arts. Until today, he realized that there was always someone better than him. He was just a frog at the bottom of a well. The realm of this old monster was definitely a level that he had never heard of. As a warrior, he had been pursuing the end of martial arts all his life. Although he was depressed today, didn't it also open the door to a new world for him, and let him see an unprecedented light? Void breaking. Have you heard of it? Second great uncle glanced at him, and said lightly. The sloppy old man's expression changed greatly. He blurted out, What? Void breaking is real. Void breaking was to break the void with one's martial arts strength, and go to another realm. In recent days, there were such descriptions in some novel martial arts novels, and there were even related theories in the martial arts world. As a supreme master, he naturally didn't care about this. This kind of saying was too mysterious. If human beings could have such power, what was the difference between them and immortals? However, the existence of the old man in front of him had subverted his previous ideas. At this moment, he didn't dare to completely deny it. When he raised his head, his face suddenly showed an excited expression. He said, I wonder if Senior can open my eyes and let me see if I can break the void. Second great uncle's face turned red. He glared at the sloppy old man and said, Get out of here. In the courtyard, the eyes of Xiao Huan and several maids in the mansion sparkled with admiration. Li Yi was vividly telling them about the martial arts circle convention today, and how Second Miss defeated a supreme master and won the position of the chief of the martial arts world. In the room, Mississippi Lu's pretty face was a little blank. She looked at Rui and asked, What should I do next? Rui looked outside the door. After a moment, she withdrew her gaze and said, The title of the chief of the martial arts world can't convince everyone. We should improve the strength of the Lu Alliance as soon as possible, expand the influence and appeal of the Lu Alliance, and gather the power of the martial arts world. We have a lot of enemies. It's better to be prepared just in case. The Qin family is not enough. We've provoked so many powerful enemies. Not long after, Mississippi Lu walked out of the room and glanced at Li Yi with dissatisfaction. Seeing her appear, Xiao Huan and several chattering figures instantly surrounded her. Chapter 577. Although the Jing state also had foreign enemies, the degree of danger was far less than the situation of the southern Song dynasty, described in The Return of the Condor Heroes. Whether it was the common people or Jianghu, the awareness of the nation's worries was much weaker. Hence, there was no need for them to imitate novels and discuss how they should be loyal to their country and force back powerful enemies. Instead, sparring with each other and electing a master of martial arts was the most important thing. The second thing was to use this event, which had not been seen in decades in the world of martial artists, to make friends with heroes from all walks of life, gain knowledge, and see the world. However, after the competition for the leader of the martial arts world, in the next few days, everyone's mood was even higher. Although Leader Lu was a woman, she was as forthright as a man. She held the hero banquet for 3 consecutive days. There was wine and food, and heroes from all walks of life ate and drank for free. In these few days, everyone competed with each other. When their hands were itchy, they would compete on the stage. More than half of the martial arts world's top experts gathered together. It was a grand and rare sight. Among them, there were countless people who expressed their intention to join the Lu Alliance. There was no other reason than that any member of the Lu Alliance could earn points by completing missions. These points could be directly exchanged for silver, or they could be used to exchange for weapons forged by famous blacksmiths. They could even be used to ask for pointers from masters on the sky roll. If their points reached a certain level, it was even possible to ask a grandmaster to teach them martial arts. Of course, to exchange for points, it was not necessary to join the Lu Alliance. Other than the internal missions, the Martial Arts World Union also released some other missions. The difficulty was relatively lower, and the points were lower. For example, helping the government to catch wanted criminals could earn points. These points were also useful in the Lu Alliance. 3 days. Almost 1,000 taels of silver is gone. What a wastrel, what a wastrel, Li sighed. Although he had a lot of money, it was still a little painful to spend 1,000 taels of silver without even making a splash. Now that he thought about it, Hero Gua and his wife were the real rich people. The hero banquet lasted for a month. How much money did they spend? From another perspective, this was also a kind of investment. After all, the martial arts world's people added up to a huge force that could not be underestimated. It was necessary to raise a flag and start a rebellion. However, whether or not this investment would be able to recoup its capital, and when it would be able to recoup its capital, was unknown. After feeling heartache for a while, he shook his head. So be it if he squandered. After all, his family was rich. Mississippi Lou's method of squandering was not ruthless enough. Now the brothel, including all the shops, brought in more than 1,000 taels of silver every day. The banquet of heroes would eventually come to an end. Several days later, a large number of people in the martial arts world began to leave the capital. He had gained a lot from this trip. He was lucky enough to see a fight between grandmasters, and he learned a lot from sparring with fellow martial artists. When he went back, he would slowly comprehend it. It wouldn't take long for his strength to rise to the next level. Of course, there were also some who stayed behind. With the start of the heroes' banquet, the martial arts world had entered a new era. The capital was now the core of the entire martial arts world. They were no longer alone. There were countless martial artists around them, and there was the Martial Arts Guild and Alliance leader Lu behind them. Here they could quickly improve their strength. They wanted to get on the chivalry ranking, and the chivalry ranking. When the martial arts world turned a new page, they wanted to seize the opportunity to advance bravely and stand at the top of the waves of the era. At the same time, in a remote and somewhere in the capital, a haggard and unkempt old man reached out and touched a spot on his waist. He let out a long sigh of relief, and his heart was finally at ease. God knew how he spent the past few days. He still had doubts about whether or not he was poisoned. These few days, he had trouble eating and sleeping, afraid that he would never wake up again if he fell asleep. Over the past few days, he had visited several famous doctors in the capital. One of them had even worked in the Imperial Physicians Bureau before, but they all concluded that he was not poisoned. Today, he checked his body again and confirmed that it was really just a piece of candy. Only then did he finally relax. Thinking about how he had traveled all over the capital over the past few days and had not seen any shops selling that thing, a hint of suspicion appeared on the unkempt old man's face. That candy, where did you buy it from? In a courtyard outside the capital, A man in purple said respectfully, "Your Highness, the person who fought with you on the stage that day is confirmed to be Monster Sue." Monster Sue. An inexplicable emotion appeared in the middle-aged Taoist nun's eyes. She had heard of this Grandmaster's name before, but she could not understand why he would risk his life to stop her, when there was no enmity between the two of them. At the end of the day, she still had her concerns. Even if she was stronger than Monster Sue, even if she could defeat him, it would not be easy for her. Being heavily injured would be the least of it. It was not impossible for both of them to be injured, or even perish together. To her, the position of the chief of the martial world was very important, but it was far from the point where she would trade her life for it. The man in purple continued, "Monster Sue heavily injured several experts ranked at the top of the heaven roll, but he voluntarily gave up after Miss Liu went on stage. I feel that there must be something fishy going on. A grandmaster had a grandmaster's integrity. It was impossible for anyone to do something like helping someone else for free. Apart from the royal family, no one could bribe or threaten a grandmaster." The middle-aged Taoist nun was completely puzzled by this matter. The young man next to the man in purple said with an unconvinced expression, "Aunt, are we just going to give up the position of the chief of the martial world? The holy religion has been planning for this for a long time. Naturally, we won't give up." The middle-aged Taoist nun said, "We'll put this matter aside for now. I'm going to the Qi Kingdom. It'll take at least half a year, or at most a year. During this time, all of you should stay in the capital. Don't act rashly, lest you attract the attention of the officials and the imperial court." "I understand." The man in purple immediately bowed and said, "As for that woman, don't let anyone come into contact with her. Send some people to keep an eye on her." The middle-aged Taoist nun added, "Lady, there are many people guarding that woman. It's very difficult for our people to get close to her." The man in purple looked troubled and said, "If we want to get close to her, we can only start from the brothel. We've already arranged for people to infiltrate the brothel." He had an indescribable feeling towards that woman, who had appeared out of nowhere. He had originally been someone who had nothing to do with the holy religion. Now his position in the religion had become more and more important. After he said those words in front of nearly 100 believers, there was no turning back. The middle-aged Taoist nun walked out of the courtyard. The man in purple bowed and said, "Farewell, lady." Hero Assembly? Emperor Jing held a report from the intelligence office in his hand. He frowned and said, "What's going on?" Changda, who was beside him, said, "Your Majesty, this is a grand meeting held by the people of the martial world. It's just outside the capital. Heroes from all walks of life are invited to learn from each other and compete on the same stage, to choose a chief of the martial world to lead the heroes." Emperor Jing frowned again. The so-called Hero Assembly, in the eyes of the imperial court or the emperor, was equivalent to an illegal assembly. For this kind of thing, whether it was the local officials or the imperial court, they all attached great importance to it. This was because it was also a necessary step to gather the rebels and raise flags to rebel. Chapter 578. The imperial court had always neither supported nor suppressed the so-called Jianghu in the martial arts world. No one could deny the existence of the martial arts world. However, although it existed in the Jing kingdom, it was not something that he, as the emperor, could control. This was something that no king wished to see happen. Did they commit crimes and disturb the public security near the capital? Emperor Jing put the booklet aside and asked. The so-called heroes of the martial arts world were, to put it bluntly, bandits. There were many people who bullied the weak. There were many such people on the wanted list of the government. Changda shook his head and said, "The Secret Intelligence Division attaches great importance to this matter. There have been no such incidents in the past few days. On the contrary, there have been few cases in and out of the capital these days. This group of martial arts people boast of being chivalrous and righteous. They will help when they encounter injustice. Several wanted suspects of the Ministry of Justice were killed by them." Emperor Jing was startled. He had always heard that the bandits in the martial arts world committed crimes and committed many big crimes. When did they become so kind that they would help the government? Changda explained. There is a chivalry list in the martial arts world. If these people want to be on the list, they have to do more chivalrous things. The local government has a tacit attitude towards this kind of thing. They will even take the initiative to cooperate with them. The public security of some states and counties is indeed much better. Chivalry list? Emperor Jing nodded slightly and said after a moment. The martial arts world is also a great force. If it can be used by the imperial court, it will be of great help. Changda showed a bitter smile and said, Your Majesty, the martial arts world will never be used by the imperial court. Most of them are arrogant and obsessed with martial arts. They are extremely resistant to the government and the imperial court. They will not work for the imperial court directly. Moreover, after the heroes' assembly, those people have dispersed. It is not so easy to gather them again. If they can continue to be like this, it is also a good thing. Emperor Jing pondered for a moment and asked, Is it possible to recruit the leader of the martial arts world? Changda smiled and shook his head as he recalled the information the intelligence division had gathered. With 2 grandmasters participating, it was strange that the position of alliance leader had ended up in the hands of that little girl. Just as he was about to speak, he raised his head and saw Emperor Jing clutching his chest. His breathing was rapid and his expression changed. In a flash, he appeared beside him and hurriedly said, Your Majesty, Your Majesty. 2 eunuchs hurriedly ran out of the hall. Not long after, the imperial physician Lu Jimin carried a medicine chest and quickly stepped into the hall of diligent government. Damn it! Why is the winter in the capital so cold? It's at least -10 degrees. Wearing a thick coat, Li Yi stood in the yard, stamping his feet and blowing air into his hands. Xiao Huan, who was standing at the side, also wrapped herself tightly. She wore thick gloves on her hands and tiptoed to help Li Yi brush off the snow on his shoulders. Madame said yesterday that the winter in the capital is very cold. She was afraid that the young master and miss would not be used to it. The servant girl, who had just celebrated her 16th birthday, helped Li Yi straighten his collar and said, The young master should go back to the house and stay for a while. If you are cold, go back first. Li Yi shook his head. He rubbed his hands a few times, and they immediately became warm. This was the second winter he had spent in this world. The winter in Qing'an Prefecture was not too bad. Although there was snow, it was not very cold. The winter in Jingdo, on the other hand, was no different from the winter he had experienced in his last life. Holding a delicate wooden knife in his hand, the snow sculpture on the stone table was almost complete. Xiao Huan looked at the snow sculpture on the stone table, and the corners of her mouth curled up. There were 4 palm-sized figures in total. Eldest miss, second miss, the young master and her. Although after moving to the capital, there were countless good food and fun things to do. But what she missed the most was still the days in the stockade with the young master and the young miss. The proud Lolita, who had wrapped herself up like a bear, rolled out of the room. Seeing the snow sculpture on the stone table, her large eyes immediately widened. I want it too. I want it too. I want to be with father and mother. If father sees it, he will definitely be very high. Li Yi rubbed the proud Lolita's little face. She ran away before she finished speaking. Rubbing her face quickly, she picked up a snowball from the side and threw it over. She said angrily, You wait, I'm going to find Sister Rui. Finishing, she rolled back into the room to complain. Li Yi placed his hand on his face and immediately shivered. When he looked at Xiao Huan, the servant girl broke into a run. He rubbed his hands hard and turned back to look at the snow sculpture on the stone table. He smiled and turned to walk back into the room. It was the winter of the 2nd year of Jinghe, the 23rd of the 12th month, the little new year. 2 months had passed since the heroes' assembly. 2 months ago, the old emperor fell ill again. Although his life was not in danger, his body did not seem to be getting better. The morning court session changed from 1 day to 3 days, then 5 days. At this point, the last time the officials attended court was already 7 days ago. The winter weather was cold, and the air was dry. It was the season when asthma occurred frequently. The second year of Jinghe was a hot summer that had not been seen in decades. It indicated that this year's winter would be especially cold. This matter was finally confirmed not long ago. In this period of time, Li Yi had entered the palace a few times. The old emperor's body would not collapse in a short period of time. At least, it would not be a problem for him to survive this winter. The earth dragon was burning hot. The inside and outside of the room were two different worlds. Little Nian wanted to eat dumplings. Rui was making dumplings. On one side was Mississippi Lu. Xiao Huan sat on the other side to help. Yong Ning was watching from the opposite side. As for the Tsundere Lolita, she was purely here to cause trouble. When she saw Li Yi coming in, she pounced towards Li Yi with her hands covered in flour. Li Yi's palm pressed against her forehead, so she could only bare her fangs and brandish her claws. In the end, she gave up on smearing the flour on Li Yi's face. When she turned around and saw the dumplings Mississippi Lu was making, she immediately held her stomach and laughed. Li Yi had long understood that Mississippi Lu was an otherworldly fairy. If she made dumplings well, she would not be called a fairy. He walked over and took her place. He pushed the pile of strangely shaped dumplings to the side. The dumplings had to be made quickly. The two little princesses had to return to the palace before the sky turned dark. Mississippi Lu stood up in embarrassment and anger. After glaring at him, she turned around and walked out of the room. It was still snowing heavily outside. In the blink of an eye, a layer of snow had fallen on the previously clean courtyard. Two maids stood beside the stone table in the courtyard with brooms, chattering to something. Mississippi Lu walked over and looked at the stone table for a long time. According to the custom, firecrackers should be set off before the meal. The Tsundere Lolita volunteered to light it up. When she was escaping, she accidentally slipped and fell. Now she was pouting and rubbing her butt. She looked rather depressed. However, this trace of depression soon disappeared when she ate the only newly minted copper coin in the dumplings. She jumped and jumped to show off. After the meal, the snow gradually subsided. Li Yi sat in the courtyard and thought about something. In a few days, he would officially enter the 3 years of scenery. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, but in fact, there were still many things that had not been resolved. In early spring, the academy would open. At that time, he naturally could not be as leisurely as he was now. A small snowball flew over and hit the back of his head. The cold snowflakes poured into his neck and immediately woke him up. The arrogant laughter of the Tsundere Lolita came from behind him. When Li Yi turned around and walked over, the laughter turned into a scream. Chapter 579. Mister, when do you think father's body will recover? Li Yi was holding a sharp dagger in his hand. He was carving on a crystal-clear block of ice that did not contain any impurities. A miniature version of a proud loli wearing a palace dress had already begun to take shape. The proud Lolita stood at the side and watched for a while. When she saw that Li Yi's ears were red from the cold, she blew on her hands and stood on her tiptoes to cover his ears. Then, she sighed and said. Li Yi turned to look at her, and saw that her delicate face was slightly red from the cold wind. She actually looked like a little adult. He smiled and said, Soon, when this winter is over. He had talked with the imperial physician Lu Jimin before. The old emperor's body was not at the point of exhaustion yet, but it would definitely not be as long as 3 to 5 years as he had initially expected. The current situation was that the more diligent he was in governing, the sooner he would step into that abyss. The more diligent he was in governing the country, the sooner he would step into that abyss. However, whether it was him or Lu Jimin, they could not change the old emperor's decision in this aspect. Winter is over. A glimmer of light appeared on the proud Lolita's face. She looked at the ice sculpture that was about to take shape, and a trace of reluctance appeared on her face. Although the other her would melt after winter, but for the sake of father's recovery, it was better for winter to pass quickly. Li Yi turned back to look. Yong Ning and Xiao Huan were hiding in the room, with only their heads peeking out. The snow in the corner had been swept away. A cover made of bamboo, a pile of rice, a wooden stick, and a thin silk thread extended into the room. A few sparrows tried a few times, but in the end, they could not resist the temptation and hopped into the cover to peck at the rice grains. Suddenly, the silk thread was tugged, and the elder girl ran out of the house with the younger girl. Yong Ning's affection for the old emperor was very limited. It was probably not even a tenth of the affection she had for the proud Lolita. This was normal. She only had a short memory of the old emperor in recent days. There were some things that she could not understand at this stage, but in another 2 years, she would be able to understand. The proud Lolita's attention was quickly attracted by the sparrows under the cover. She trotted over and discussed how to take the sparrows out of the cover. Li swept away the ice on the table. He could not fulfill the proud Lolita's request to carve an old emperor. She could do it herself, but if it was someone else, he would have accused her of being disrespectful. The sparrows were caught, but when they were taken out of the cover, they accidentally flew away. The 3 girls were a little disappointed. Li had to personally help them catch 2 more sparrows. It was not unusual for 2 girls to play this game. Xiao Huan had just passed her 16th birthday, but she was like a child who could not grow up. In this kind of environment, her personality would probably not change even after a few years. As the end of the year approached, the incense in the temples near the capital was also at its peak. The old mistress and Rui went to the Cold Mountain Temple. Fang's wife and a few other women also went with them. They gave out vegetarian food and accumulated merit. It would probably be 2 or 3 days before they returned. From today onwards, Fang and the others completely let go of themselves. They went to the city early in the morning and did not know if they would return at night. As for Li himself, he could only look after the children at home. A silk thread was tied to the sparrow's leg, and the other end was held in their hands. Every time it wanted to fly away, it would be pulled back by the silk thread. This was what Li played with when he was young. Yong Ning was too young, and probably had not played with it before. Xiao Huan and the proud Lolita found it even more interesting. After chattering in the courtyard for a while, Xiao Huan ran in from outside and said, "Young master, those birds are very pitiful. Can we let them go?" "Go." Li waved his hand, and the little servant girl ran out quickly. "Young master, they have been let go." After a while, she trotted back again. Li was writing something at the table, and she sat on the other side. She supported her chin with one hand, blinked her eyes, and stared blankly for a while. It seemed that she thought of something, and her face suddenly turned red. "What are you thinking about?" After a while, even her neck was covered with a layer of pink. Li stretched out his hand and snapped his fingers in front of her eyes. "No, nothing." After the little servant girl woke up with a start, her face was so red that it looked like it was about to drip blood. She lowered her head and ran out quickly. Li Xian walked in from outside, looked back, and said, "What, you finally made a move on your little servant girl? Why are you so free today?" Li glanced at him and said, "Is the Academy of Science ready?" This sentence touched on Li Xian's sore spot. His face immediately fell, and he waved his hand and said, "I don't know if it is too late to tell Uncle Huang that I don't plan to open the Academy of Science now." What was a typical example of courting death? This was it. He had nothing better to do, but he had to run to the old emperor and tell him to open the Academy of Science. It was clearly too late to regret it now. What was science? Science was, even Li himself could not explain it. In any case, it was something that humans could see and think of. All phenomena and laws could be related to science. The establishment of the Academy of Science was not just to create some strange things. It involved agronomy, mechanics, medicine, biology, economics, neurology, and so on. Even their so-called mathematics, strictly speaking, belonged to the ranks of science. There was a saying that went, "Mathematics is the queen of science." When the time was right, he could directly merge the mathematics school into the Academy of Science. That would save him a lot of trouble. Of course, even if he had a heaven-defying bug, it would take decades or even a lifetime to build up these things step by step, and then slowly develop the technology tree. It might not even be enough. Although Li Xian did not need to make it so complicated, the simplest and most basic things still gave him a headache. He had already raised the flag. If he could not produce any results when the time came, he would lose a lot of face. Li Yi looked at him again, and there was a hint of pity in his eyes. You have to help me. Li Xian looked at him and said. Li Yi glanced at him and asked, why? Li Xian looked at him and said, because we are friends. Friends? Li Yi had a confused look on his face. What is a friend, and what is a friend? Do you know what the word friend means? I don't know. Li Xian shook his head and stood up. He walked out of the door and said, I originally wanted to introduce a big business to you. Since we are not friends, I will find someone else. Wait. Li Xian turned around and asked, what else is there? Li looked at him and said, I thought about it and I think I should help you. Why? Li Xian raised his eyebrows. Because we are friends. Li looked at him and said seriously, you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.